Chapter 7:16. Hearing these words, Yi Guipin shook her head helplessly. Raising her slender fingers, she gently rubbed her slightly stuffy brows. She didn't know what to say. Of course, she knew what Li Qingping's words meant. However, as the emperor's concubine, she, a girl with an innocent and unaffected nature, was only able to sit safely in her current position because Lady Lu had urged her to be quiet before she entered the palace. In this chaotic situation, she couldn't say anything. The present royal palace had completely changed since 3 years ago. The Empress Dowager was dead, the Empress was dead, and the eldest princess was also dead. Lady Shu was secluded in the cold palace. During the Jingdou rebellion, Yi Guipin, who had given birth to Li Qingping, and Ning the Talented, who had given birth to the Great Prince, followed Fan Xian and the Great Prince's bravery or being forced to stand on the emperor's side. With the rebellion, the two nobles rose in status. Ning the Talented was raised a level. Although Yi Guipin was still a Guipin, as she grew older, she would gradually be promoted to a Guifei. The imperial palace was managed by Yi Guipin and Lady Ning. Yi Guipin had a good temperament, and Lady Ning did not care about internal affairs. Naturally, the imperial palace was a peaceful place, and they lived 3 good years. However, 8 days ago, there was a loud crash in the imperial study, and the good days finally came to an end. Because Lady Ning had bravely pleaded for mercy on behalf of old Director Qin, she had been banished by the emperor to the cold palace to accompany Lady Shu. It was fortunate that she had given birth to a good son. Otherwise, given the emperor's anger that day, immediate death would have been the best result. Presently, Yi Guipin was the only noble mistress in the palace. The concubine selection that had begun 3 days ago was under her sole control. She understood the true purpose behind this sudden concubine selection better than anyone else. After the Jingdou rebellion, the emperor still had 2.5 sons. Other than the great prince and third prince Li Qingping far away in Dongyi, the other half naturally referred to Fan Xian. Because of Qin Pingping's rebellion, Fan Xian and the emperor had sunk into a cold war. No one knew how this matter would end. These 2.5 sons had completely learned the lessons of the crown prince and second prince. The relationship between them was very close. Putting aside the friendship between the great prince and Fan Xian, even the teacher-student relationship between Fan Xian and the third prince was stronger than the emperor had expected. After the 7th year of the Qin calendar, Fan Xian had entered the palace many times. However, his contact with the third prince had decreased. One reason was because the third prince was clearly the heir apparent, so he had to avoid suspicion. The other reason was that the emperor had purposely weakened Fan Xian's influence on the third prince. Even if Fan Xian was completely useless, he had one strength that everyone admired. It was his ability to influence the people around him and make them focus their hearts on him. Regardless of whether it was some of the officials close to the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian's 4 disciples, or the troops in Baoyue brothel, they all proved this point. The third prince was his student. Although he had seen little of Fan Xian after returning from Jiangnan, he had not forgotten Fan Xian's teachings. He had long changed from the sinister and ruthless child of the past to a reserved prince. There was no internal strife or jealousy between the 3 princes. If this had happened in the past, this would have been a wonderful thing. After the Jingdou rebellion 3 years ago, the Qing emperor had reflected on himself and presumably had no interest in driving his sons crazy. However, the revelation of Qin Pingping's rebellion made this seemingly wonderful relationship no longer so wonderful in the emperor's eyes. Yi Guipin knew this very well. If the emperor no longer completely trusted Fan Xian, then he had to be wary of whether his sons would band together and do something. Even if these 3 sons could not band together, if the emperor actually made a move against Fan Xian and chilled everyone's hearts, what would the situation in the royal palace be like when Qingping grew up day by day? Thus, the emperor wanted a concubine and more birthing machines in the palace to help him give birth to a few more sons. Iguipin glanced at her son. Her brows were full of worry as she gently sighed. Li Qingping did not sigh. He only gently held his mother's hand. There were many sinister things in the palace. Ever since he was young, he had grown up like this. He had watched helplessly as his two brothers wanted to kill him and his father for that chair. In the end, he had been saved by his other two brothers. He had long discovered that if the royal palace was more peaceful, life would be much smoother. However, there had never been such a good thing in the world. He knew that his connection to the Fan Manor was too deep. If his father no longer trusted Fan Xian, he would probably not be at ease leaving the world to him so easily. Pick a beauty to enter the palace. Did his father want to have a few more sons? Was he wary of him? Or was he wary of Fan Xian? Tomorrow, Sir will enter the palace to pay his respects. Perhaps things will not be so bad. Li Qingping forced a smile and comforted his mother. Fan Xian is very stubborn. Who knows whether or not he will enter the palace tomorrow? Iguipin smiled helplessly. She knew that even if the emperor wanted to have a few more sons to warn Shufang Palace and Fan Xian, that was a matter for a long time. Furthermore, the Qing court had long gotten used to Li Qingping being the future Qing emperor. His position was even more stable than the crown prince's. The emperor would not stop the future he had planned for a long time just because of his distrust of the Fan Manor. However, she truly did not know where the true problem between the emperor and Fan Xian lay. Was it Director Chen's death or something else? If Fan Xian was willing to admit his guilt and lower his head, as long as he could continue to live in Jingdou, his power and position would slowly recover. Then, Shufang Palace would not need to worry about these beauties that had been sent to the palace by officials and nobles. The tips of Yi Guipin's brows furrowed slightly. A rare iciness suddenly flashed through her eyes. It's good if these girls know their place. If they truly want to use the little power their paternal family has in court to stir up trouble in the palace, I will not tolerate them. After all, she was a woman who had been the nominal mistress of the palace for 3 years. No matter how innocent and unaffected she was when she presided over the consort selection, most of it had long been worn away in the palace. At this moment, her cold words naturally revealed a bit of dignity. I heard that when the beauties entered the palace yesterday, Mother chased 3 of them out, Li Qingping said sincerely. After all, this is Father's wish. If you do it too obviously, I'm afraid Father will not be happy. Even if your father knew, he would still be happy. Those girls without any discernment. Yi Guipin smiled coldly. The court hasn't had concubines in a long time. From Taichung Temple to the Board of Rites, there are no rules at all. All kinds of girls are sent into the palace. I don't know what they heard in their paternal family, but once they entered the palace, they threw out large amounts of silver. Those serving maids and nannies probably haven't eaten this kind of silver in a long time, and they actually accepted it. She gazed at the third prince and calmly said, as soon as those beauties entered the palace, they asked about the situation in the palace. They didn't discuss much about the masters of the palace, but when it came to the person in the royal study, they dared to say anything. In the end, it wasn't some proper official. They were all old officials of the nobility that were about to fall. They probably didn't know what the Fan and Lu families were and naively thought that the Fan Manor had truly lost power. But for some reason, that person received the emperor's favor, so they turned their words toward that person. Who knows how unpleasant their words were? I chased those 3 beauties out of the palace to give the rest a warning and to protect their families' lives. Yi Guipin gently tucked a strand of hair at the side of her temple and faintly said, putting aside how angry the emperor would be if he actually heard this kind of discussion, if these words reached Fan Xian's ears, once things settle, how miserable do you think these beauties will be in the manor? Li Qingping finally couldn't resist laughing and said, if the recent situation really calms down, I'm afraid mother will have to add oil and vinegar to her story for you to hear. Yi Guipin beamed with joy and spat. This child is speaking nonsense. Mother is not that kind of person. Li Qingping scratched his head and said, but father always leaves the young lady of the Fan family in the royal study. It is not in line with the rules. Yi Guipin was silent for a long time and then smiled. She didn't say anything. In reality, she knew that the man who had turned her into a woman, the most powerful man in the world, could actually only feel lonely. In his eyes, the women in the palace all seemed to have demands. Perhaps only the young lady of the Fan family, who had nothing to do with the royal palace, could make him truly feel that he had nothing to ask for. What the emperor liked was for the people beside him to not ask for anything from him. Thinking of this, Yi Guipin's expression became dull. She gazed at Li Qingping and warmly said, you shouldn't go to the cold palace too often. Be careful that the emperor is not happy. Lady Shu has been banished to the cold palace, but in the end, she is second brother's birth mother. In the past, she has treated us brothers well. It has nothing to do with what second brother has done, Li Qingping explained in a low voice. Now that Aunt Ning has also been banished to the cold palace, I have to go see. Yi Guipin smiled and didn't say anything more. She knew that the reason the third prince often went to the cold palace to visit and gained a reputation in the palace for being benevolent, as well as the emperor's unexpected admiration, was all because of Fan Xian's orders. During the Jingdou rebellion 3 years ago, it was said that Fan Xian had personally promised the dying second prince to take care of Lady Shu for him. In Shufang Palace, the mother and son quietly talked about the concubines and the girl in the royal study. At the same time, the girl in the royal study had already helped the emperor, who had yet to recover, walk 1 round and was about to return to the royal study. Just as Yi Guipin had said, the emperor only admired this girl and would not absurdly have any other thoughts. He had already entered the realm of a great grandmaster and had long seen through the matters between men and women. The reason for the concubines was mostly due to political considerations. On the stroll, the emperor would not talk to Fan Ruoruo about the concubines. He only casually discussed the storm in Jingdou these 8 days and Fan Xian's matter. Most of the time, it was the emperor talking and Fan Ruoruo listening. The emperor had been raised by the Fan family's grandmother, so he had a natural closeness to the Fan family. The emperor had never had a daughter in this life. After Lin Wan moved out of the royal palace, it seemed that he could no longer find this relatively warm feeling. The two of them walked in front while Eunuch Yao and a group of people followed nervously from a distance. Strolling in the dark night, this group inevitably looked a bit laughable. Just as they were about to turn into the stone door in front of the royal study, the emperor stopped his steps and looked at the bowed eunuch beside the stone door. After a long silence, he asked, "How have you been with Eunuch Dai recently?" This eunuch was once a popular person in the royal study, Hongzhu. After the matter from 3 years ago had faded, he had been following Eunuch Dai on paper-related errands. Coincidentally encountering the emperor in the night, he had waited to the side with complicated emotions. Unexpectedly, the emperor would suddenly greet him. He quickly replied in a trembling voice. The emperor glanced at him with satisfaction. Back then, he had greatly liked this quick-witted little eunuch. Otherwise, he would not have allowed him to personally follow in the royal study. Later, he had sent him to the Eastern Palace to be the head eunuch. It was only because of some coincidental matters that Hongzhu had fallen into. Even so, the emperor still did not kill him. Suddenly, the emperor's heart jumped. He thought of when he saw the wheelchair earlier and the scene of Fan Xian entering the palace on that snowy day. The little eunuch pushing the wheelchair had been Hongzhu. Gradually, a glimmer of a smile flashed through the emperor's eyes. He remembered that Fan Xian seemed to dislike this little eunuch a lot in the past. No one knew what he was thinking. He opened his mouth and ordered, from tomorrow onwards, return to the royal study. Hong Zhu was overjoyed. He knelt on the ground and vaguely gave his thanks and kowtowed. No one noticed a complicated expression flash through his lowered eyes. The emperor waved his hand in annoyance and followed Fan Ruoro through the stone door. The emperor suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Snow and rain, there is no need to kneel when seeing me. This is a rule I set after I ascended the throne. It has rained today, but the ground is still wet, so Hongzhu does not need to kneel." Fan Ruoro glanced at the emperor in surprise. She didn't know why the emperor was saying this. Am I really not a good emperor? Just as they were about to walk out of the royal study, the emperor suddenly stopped his steps and asked calmly and seriously. If there was a question, there would be an answer. At this moment, there was only Fan Ruoro by his side, so he was waiting for her to make a judgment. Fan Ruoro's heart trembled slightly. She thought to herself that she was not a great scholar of state affairs or a scholar with a brush of history. How could she have the right to judge such an important question? However, the emperor did not take a step. He only calmly waited for her to speak. Fan Ruoro was silent for a long time. She thought of everything she had seen in the royal study these days, as well as the various details in the royal palace. She thought of the lives of the Qing people in the provinces she had seen as she traveled the world. In the end, she could not hide her eyes and sincerity. After thinking for a moment, she gently opened her lips and replied seriously, "Compared to the previous emperor, the emperor is indeed a good emperor." The emperor was silent for a moment and carefully savored Fan Ruoro's words. A moment later, his expression relaxed and he laughed loudly. His laughter echoed in the garden in front of the royal study, under the eaves, and then collided with the palace wall before crashing back. Eunuch Yao and the others following behind him were slightly startled. They didn't know what the young lady of the Fan family had said to make the emperor laugh so happily. It was a happiness he had never felt before. For a moment, all sorts of feelings were mixed. They admired this young lady of the Fan family, who rarely spoke. Fan Ruoro also smiled slightly. Looking at the emperor beside her, complicated emotions rose in her heart. She finally understood why the emperor had treated her so differently these days. Perhaps Guipin had guessed some of it, and Fan Ruoro had also guessed some of it earlier. Fan Xian's thoughts were not wrong. However, the emperor had kept Fan Ruoro in the royal palace, by his side, in the royal study, and had her watch him manage the power of the country despite being heavily injured. Perhaps it was just that after his conversation with Qin Pingping in the royal study, the emperor needed someone to prove that he was a good emperor. No matter what that old dog in the wheelchair said, he was still a good emperor, was he not? The emperor seemed to have finally made up his mind. A confident and calm smile rose to his face again as he walked toward the royal study. Summon. Summon. Summon the Imperial College teacher Fan Xian into the palace. Some were rough and some were as sharp as a duck, but the loud calls were all the same. There were no court meetings, and it was a regular day off. The royal palace was silent. The imperial army generals and soldiers' expressions were solemn. They did not look sideways and allowed the young man in green robes to walk past them. However, what did not match their calm expressions was their nervousness. 9 days had passed since Qin Pingping's treason was exposed and he was killed by 1,000 cuts on the execution field in front of the palace. That day, Sir Fan Jr. had killed his way into the execution field and looked down on the emperor's authority. This had already made clear Sir Fan Jr.'s attitude on this matter. In the following days, the Cold War between the emperor and the powerful officials of the Qing court had developed to its peak. Countless spies the internal court had scattered outside the Fan Manor died tragically. According to rumors in officialdom, there had been an assassination attempt on Fan Xian 3 li outside. When the news of the emperor summoning Fan Xian into the palace to pay his respects was revealed, everyone let out a breath. Although the Qin kingdom was powerful, they still did not want to bear the burden of the bloodshed that could come from the fall out of this ruler and official, father and son. From another perspective, this meant that even though Fan Xian no longer had an official position, the Qin people in the court and marketplace still thought that if he truly threw caution to the wind, he would cause a certain degree of harm to the Qin kingdom. In just 9 days, the Cold War between the emperor and Fan Xian had come to an end. It was truly something worth celebrating. In the eyes of Hu the scholar and the others, there was no problem that could not be resolved between this pair of ruler and official, father and son. It was nothing more than intense emotions that forced out the ruthlessness and stubbornness in the father and son's hearts. No one was willing to give in first. Now, the emperor had taken the first step. It meant that the palace had taken a step back. Presumably, Fan Xian had to accept this favor. In the cold air, Fan Xian silently followed Eunuch Yao forward. Eunuch Yao, who was already the head eunuch in the palace, still played the humble role in front of him. However, Fan Xian did not have much interest in talking. A teacher of the Imperial College. Although Fan Xian was now a commoner and the only thing that could be called a public official was this title, it was still piercing to the ears. Amidst these urging, Fan Xian arrived at the royal study. With some surprise, he saw Hongzhu waiting outside the study. Fan Xian did not hide his surprise and nodded slightly. Hongzhu bowed deeply. No one could see the exchange in the eyes between the two of them. Entering the study and seeing his sister, Fan Xian's mood calmed slightly. He then bowed deeply toward the man on the soft couch but stubbornly did not say a word. That day, Fan Xian had ridden back to Jingdou alone. Until he carried Chen Pingping's body and left the execution field, he had been reluctant to cast a glance at the man on the palace walls. Thinking carefully, it had been many months since he and the emperor had seen each other. The emperor looked at Fan Xian calmly. He was not surprised by the emotions Fan Xian revealed. He did not allow his officials to have any rebellious emotions in front of him. This did not mean he could not accept his favorite son revealing his true nature or stubbornness in front of him. The silence in the royal study did not last for long. Fan Ruoruo bowed slightly toward the emperor and smiled at her brother before leaving the royal study. She had stayed because the emperor wanted Fan Xian to be at ease. Since this goal had been achieved, she also had to leave this ruler and official a quiet environment to talk. I have long wondered why I have been so lenient toward you, the emperor looked at Fan Xian and slowly said. Naturally, it is not because of the contributions you once made to the Qin court. It was not until yesterday that I finally understood. The emperor looked at him and calmly said, I think there is no need for too much nonsense between us. There are some files here that you can take a look. In this story, it had been repeated countless times. The Qing emperor and Fan Xian were the two most talented actors in the world. However, in the royal study, the Qing emperor did not act. He only said these words straightforwardly. The words were very simple, but Fan Xian understood the meaning hidden within. He knew that what was placed on the file in front of him was evidence that Chen Pingping had once presided over his murder, such as the Hanging Temple, the Valley, and everything related to the separation. According to the dead old man's plan, Fan Xian should act shocked and sorrowful and then return to the emperor's side. For some reason, seeing the emperor's confident, calm, and elegant expression, he felt a boundless anger. The anger made his heart ache and ache. He did not want to continue acting. Fan Xian raised his head and looked straight at the man he was most familiar with and most unfamiliar to him. He did not move for a long time. Chapter 717. He took a deep breath. It was not yet late autumn, but in the imperial study, a dark-colored heater had already begun to emit warmth. The air was a little dry, and it went straight from his mouth and nose to his lungs, causing him to feel a faint pain. Fan Xian looked at the emperor's face in front of him and suddenly thought of many things and people. The storm in the Qing kingdom began decades ago. As the dust gradually settled, the only ones still in the eye of the storm were probably this father and son pair. Fan Xian's attitude toward the emperor was actually very difficult to grasp. Even he could not clearly explain it. From Danzhou to Jingdou, brushing shoulders in the Qing temple, meeting for the first time in the bamboo tea shop beside Taiping courtyard, from bestowing marriage to the Overwatch Council, and learning of the portrait in the palace, Fan Xian had guessed earlier than anyone else. He had guessed his true past. Whether it was the Fan Shen of his previous life or the Fan Xian of this one, they were both fatherless and motherless. Unfortunately, they were born in the kingdom of Qing, so they had a mother named Yi Qingmei. Later, they discovered that they had a father. But this was a bloodline inheritance. For Fan Xian to truly regard this emperor as his father was something he could not have done at the time. At that time, Fan Xian had been acting the entire time. He had acted beautifully. No one knew that there was a completely different soul inside him, so he could fool everyone, even the emperor in front of him. As time slowly progressed, Fan Xian gradually began to have suspicions about the murder case in Taiping courtyard. He became a bit more wary and even afraid of the emperor on the dragon chair. Thus, his acting became more steady and cautious. But, after all these years, if Yi Qingmei and Fan Xian were that connected soul hidden in history, an existence with a natural sense of closeness, a person who used the aura of everything around her to remind herself and gradually became one with her mother's image. The emperor had used so many years of interaction, favor, trust, methods, and realm to get closer to Fan Xian's life step by step, making him feel indecisive. It had to be said that the emperor had invested in Fan Xian a trust and tolerance that he had rarely shown in his life. At the beginning of the battle for the throne, perhaps the emperor had only watched his illegitimate son gradually grow stronger and, to a greater extent, used him. Gradually, the emperor's attitude toward Fan Xian changed, particularly after the Jingdou rebellion in the 7th year of the Qing calendar. For Fan Xian to be able to have his present position and power in the Qing court and people, it had to be said that the emperor's favor toward him had far surpassed what he had toward the crown prince or the second prince. This pair of ruler and official, father and son, often discussed matters in the palace and chatted in the royal study. Fan Xian hid something, so he continued to act. While acting, he could clearly feel what exactly the emperor's attitude toward him was. Thus, during these 3 years after learning the truth about Taiping courtyard, Fan Xian had been suffering with difficulty. Although he had been preparing in certain areas, he had never been able to truly settle his heart. On one hand, he knew that His Majesty was like the great snowy mountain in his dreams. It was impossible for him to be easily overturned. On the other hand, he often asked himself late at night, what kind of light would come out of the crevice he was in? How should he choose? He wanted to choose a third path that did not necessarily lead to bloodshed. Thus, he had worked hard to be the vanguard of the king and the Qing court. He worked busily, completely against his nature. He only hoped that any matter could have a relatively calm and bright ending. He wanted Qin Pingping and his father to be able to retire peacefully. In the end, all of this was an illusion. Fan Xian was disappointed, even hopeless. He felt sad and tired. He didn't want to act anymore. After carefully reading the files on the table, Fan Xian gently coughed. Thinking about it, that deep breath earlier and forcefully suppressing the emotions in his heart had already caused some pain in his unhealed lungs to once again reappear in some part of them. The emperor looked at him silently and also gently coughed. There was an acknowledgement of each other's strength between this strange pair of father and son, as well as complicated emotions. Even their injuries were put together to tell the two of them that they were actually very similar people. According to Chen Pingping's plan, perhaps at this moment, Fan Xian should show an expression of disbelief, tremble all over, be angry and confused, and then roar at the emperor, "I don't believe it. I don't believe this was done by the old director. Why would he do this?" Then, the emperor would gently and coldly explain to him what kind of goal Chen Pingping had lived for the last few decades of his life, what kind of bone-deep hatred he had for the Li royal family, and how good this old dog had been to you in the past was actually all fake. He wanted the Qing kingdom to be destroyed in turmoil and destroyed in the disaster caused by our falling out as father and son. Then, Fan Xian would still appear to be in disbelief. He would even angrily berate the emperor, "You faked all of this. Chen Pingping is not like that." Then, he would angrily leave the royal study and return to his manor. He would think for many days and truly understand the emperor's painstaking efforts, Chen Pingping's insidiousness, and so on and so forth. This was a proper court drama. This was the great turning point that the dramatists needed. The emotional conflict, in the end, yielded to the mutual trust between the emperor and his officials because of the ironclad truth. From then on, father and son would let go of their former enmity. The curtains would open, and the musical instruments would ring out. The glorious Qing kingdom would step onto the stage of history. However, Fan Xian did not have any expression. Fan Xian didn't have any expression. He just placed the files back on the table. He lowered his head slightly and didn't say a word. It was as if he was thinking about something important. It was also as if he was just too tired. Tired to the point that entering the palace had used up all of his energy. The emperor looked at him calmly. His eyes gradually narrowed at a very slow speed. His eyes gradually brightened and then dimmed. Disappointment rose and then turned to a kind of calm or coldness. "So, you knew all of this the entire time?" The emperor looked at his favorite illegitimate child and coldly said, "I have always found it strange. The shadow has always followed you. This kind of thing shouldn't have been hidden from you. You should have long known that the hanging temple incident was done by that old dog. I have also been thinking. If you truly continue acting according to the things presented in these files, once I ask why Chen Pingping betrayed me, I really don't know how to open my mouth." The tip of Fan Xian's finger trembled slightly. He acutely sensed that a great change had occurred in the emperor's state of mind. However, his expression did not change at all. He raised his head and looked directly at the emperor. In a slightly raspy voice, he said, "I actually always knew." The emperor narrowed his eyes and looked at him. A cold light flashed and disappeared in his eyes. Fan Xian pressed his slightly dry lips together and did his best to suppress the rising and falling emotions in his heart. Calmly, he said, "Furthermore, I have always worked hard. I have worked hard to not let the blood of the past swallow up the things that already exist. From the moment I made this decision, I knew it was a very naive and childish choice. However, after my battle to the death with Yan Xiaoyi 3 years ago, I understood that in one's life, one has to work hard to do something. Even if others laugh at my naivety, I have to silently try. Of course, naive things are always easy to fail. However, he looked at the emperor and said, any great thing, at the very beginning, doesn't it always seem particularly idealistic and naive to the point of ridicule? For example, the vow you, mother, and the others made by the seaside in Danzhou. The emperor continued to look at him silently. His eyes grew brighter and brighter. From the moment Fan Xian opened his mouth to say that he knew and worked hard, he knew clearly what kind of goal his favorite son had wanted to achieve all these years. For some reason, the emperor, who was already used to coldness, suddenly felt a glimmer of warmth in his heart. Perhaps it was not a bad thing. However, this glimmer of warmth often disappeared too quickly. He has already left. He no longer thinks about the past. Why did you? Fan Xian looked at the emperor woodenly and said in a raspy voice, why did you have to have him die? These words were directed at Qin Pingping. Fan Xian did not cry out or angrily berate. He was only filled with sorrow and helplessness, as well as undisguised hatred. He looked woodenly into the emperor's eyes. The emperor also looked at him calmly. After a long silence, the emperor smiled. His smile was cold, disappointed, and sharp. Ha! The emperor narrowed his eyes and said, I killed him. The emperor slammed his palm down on the table beside him. He didn't smash the wooden table into pieces, but the force was enough to send the paper on the table flying. He looked at Fan Xian and scolded in a low voice with slight anger, what I am most angry about is this. I gave him a way out. If he hadn't come back from Dazhou, perhaps I would have pretended nothing had happened. However, in the end, he came back alone. He forced me to kill him. The emperor's gaze was as cold as a snowy mountain. I could only do as he wished. I have stood in this world for dozens of years, and I have never trusted anyone easily, but I once trusted him. I even thought that maybe I could see him as a friend, and I even gave him a chance in the end, but he didn't give me any chance. The emperor took a deep breath. His calm voice was filled with a heart-shaking coldness. In the end, a servant will always be a servant. Hearing the word servant in these words, as well as the hatred and disdain that could not be hidden, the image of the old cripple in the black wheelchair seemed to suddenly appear in front of Fan Xian's eyes. He stared at the emperor. His voice was as sharp and cold as a knife. Gritting his teeth, he said, the mistakes of the world are all the fault of others. Of course, your majesty is wise and powerful. However, I still don't know how my pitiful mother died. The emperor's face was cold. He had no reaction at all to Fan Xian's heart-wrenching words. He only narrowed his eyes and looked at him disdainfully. Including that old dog, all of the enemies of the Qin kingdom probably hoped for the scene in the royal study to happen today. You didn't disappoint them. You only disappointed me. Someone as stupid as you cannot be taught. Fan Xian closed his eyes and then opened them. They had already recovered their calm. However, there are many things that I still don't understand. If you don't understand something, then don't think about it. The emperor's tone was indifferent. It was clear that he was disappointed in Fan Xian's behavior. As for his last question about the cause of Yi Qingmei's death, it was unconsciously suppressed by the emperor in the depths of his sea of consciousness, not allowing it to surface. He looked at Fan Xian and coldly said, in front of me, in the end, you are still an official. If you think too much, I will not let you continue to think. This was not a threat. It was just a simple statement of fact. It was just like the eldest princess's evaluation of Fan Xian. Fan Xian appeared to be naturally cold and unfeeling. In reality, he was very emotional and had too many weaknesses to grab. However, during the Jingdou rebellion, the eldest princess's wish had already been fulfilled. She did not deign to grab Fan Xian's weaknesses. However, in Jingdou, it was not a difficult matter for the emperor to crush Fan Xian to death. Hearing these cold and harsh words, Fan Xian straightened his body. Using a direct attitude that he had never shown in front of the emperor, he said, Your Majesty has treated me very well these years. I know very well, inside the royal study, the father and son were not acting. They were both saying what they wanted to say the most. For the first time, Fan Xian stood up firmly and slowly spoke of his interactions with the emperor these years, one by one. When he got to the point where he spoke seriously, the heater in the royal study seemed to sigh. The smoke twisted as if it couldn't bear to see the father and son break apart. Only Fan Xian knew how well the Qing emperor had treated Fan Xian. If it had been the crown prince, the second prince, or any other son of the Li family standing in front of the Qing emperor and saying these words, they would probably have died a long time ago. However, Fan Xian was still alive. Perhaps the Qing emperor was a heartless person and did not treat Fan Xian with much affection. Relatively speaking, he gave Fan Xian the most affection. Listening to Fan Xian's calm recollection, the emperor gradually straightened his body. He then waved his hand tiredly and said, "I am not killing you not because I can't bear to kill you." The emperor closed his eyes and was silent for a moment. He then said, "I don't want to explain what happened in the past in front of a junior like you. But I think that perhaps those people have always been watching me from above. You are my and your mother's son. Perhaps you are like a pair of eyes they have left in this world. I won't kill you because I want to prove to you, as well as those who care about you, that I am right." He opened his eyes and coldly said, "And they are all wrong." Fan Xian bowed deeply and replied, "I will stay in Jingdo obediently and watch your majesty's great plans." He did not thank the emperor for not killing him because there was no need for thanks. Since the emperor allowed him to live, he would live on well. He would keep his eyes open and watch on behalf of Yi Qingmei, Chen Pingping, and many people in the past. "You will be obedient." The emperor looked at his son and suddenly laughed. His laughter suddenly stopped. Icily, he said, "I don't believe it, and you won't believe it. However, I have never thought that your dishonesty is a flaw. I just hope that you won't be so dishonest that I can't be bothered to tolerate it. Just stay in Jingdo." The emperor glanced at him and suddenly said tiredly, "Just teaching in the Imperial College is good. Don't touch the matters of the Overwatch Council and the Palace Treasury anymore. I don't want to spend too much time on you." Having spoken to this point, it could not be said any more clearly. The emperor was giving Fan Xian one last chance to live if he was willing to be obedient. Even though this was a threat to his life, for some reason, a glimmer of confusion grew in Fan Xian's heart. He had not thought that the emperor would make such a decision in the end. The emperor looked at Fan Xian's complicated gaze. Suddenly, his heart darkened. He thought of how Fan Xian had blurted out "father" by the seaside in Danzhou. After a moment of silence, he said, "In the future, if you have nothing to do, you can still come into the palace to pay your respects. When you are alone, I allow you to call me father." There was no one else in the royal study. It was completely silent. Fan Xian's body froze slightly. Seriously, he replied, "Yes, your majesty." No one knew what the emperor and Fan Xian talked about in the royal study. At least, when Fan Xian walked out of the royal study, his body was unharmed and had not become a spirit. This reality made most people in the royal palace let out a breath. The emperor had also issued an edict for Fan Xian to return to his position. There weren't even any obscure hints of rewards. On the contrary, at almost the same time Fan Xian walked out of the royal study, a few edicts that had been prepared beforehand were sent out. The court, with the cooperation of the 6 ministries and 3 temples, began to strengthen the purge of the Overwatch Council and Palace Treasury. The edict summoning Suzhou Zhizhou Qingjialan, Jiaozhou Judge Ho Jichang, and the Palace Treasury Transport Company Su Wenmao to the capital to report on their work had also been sent out. At the same time, the edict naming Yan Bingyun the director of the Overwatch Council left the palace one step ahead of the others. It was clear that the internal court had long made preparations. The emperor saw through his son, Fan Xian, too well. Even if he didn't want to kill him, he had enough ways to trap Fan Xian in Jingdo so he wouldn't move rashly and be too dishonest. As for whether or not the information Fan Xian had sent out through the Qinian unit could, in the end, become a bargaining chip with the emperor, it would depend on whether or not the emperor had this kind of sensitivity and powerful motivation beforehand. In reality, regarding these 2 points, there was probably no one in this world who was stronger than the emperor. Fan Xian walked out of the palace with a heavy face. Hong Zhu, who saw him out, was careful and followed at his side with slight fear. Chapter 7:18. The Fan Manor's carriage traveled on the road out of the city. It had just passed the West City Gate and was headed toward the country estate in the distance shrouded in twilight. He entered the palace in the morning and only returned to the manor in the afternoon. Fan Xian did not tarry. He boarded the carriage with Wan Er and went to the country estate on the outskirts. Last night, an edict from the palace had come out. The surveillance of the Fan Manor had completely ended. People had thought that the Cold War between the Emperor and Fan Xian had ended. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian entered the palace to see the Emperor, there was no news of his return from the palace. There wasn't even a related edict. Putting aside what the officials in court and the various powers were guessing, the fact that the Fan Manor's carriage had left just like that still shocked many people. What surprised many people was that the Fan Manor's carriage had smoothly passed through the Jingdo City Guard's inspection. More accurately, it had not been inspected at all. Was the Emperor not worried that Sir Fan Jr. would leave Jingdo in a fit of anger? Although the Emperor's household did not have children running away in anger, the scene on the execution field, as well as the disputes these days, made people scratch their heads in confusion about Fan Xian's response. Many people were worried whether or not Fan Xian would leave Jingdo. It was clear that the Emperor was not worried. Otherwise, he would not have removed all the surveillance outside the Fan Manor or given Fan Xian such freedom. My sister is in the palace, and the Emperor's edict has been sent out. The subordinates and relatives who rely on me to live are all in Jingdo. How can I leave? Fan Xian tilted his head and looked at the autumn scene illuminated by the red twilight outside Jingdo. In a quiet voice, he said, "Bring back Xiaohua and Liangzi. Let's live well in the manor." Lin Wan Er's heart trembled slightly. She didn't know if Fan Xian's words came from the bottom of his heart or if they contained some other meaning. If staying in the Fan Manor and being an idle person was the Emperor's edict, then Lin Wan Er knew why Fan Xian was forced to accept this edict. The Fan Manor had received a bad piece of news when it opened. That day, Lin Wan had immediately made a decision to have Ting Zijing send the young mistress and young master to the Fan Manor outside the city. She was worried that something would happen later and was prepared to quietly send the children back to Danzhou. However, the manor had just sent news that the carriages sending the children had arrived at the manor and could no longer leave. It was not that there was an army waiting there. Rather, a eunuch was already waiting. Under these circumstances, Ting Zijing did not dare to act rashly. If he truly secretly sent the young master and mistress back to Danzhou, who knew if something would happen on the way? Would the court shed all pretenses of cordiality and snatch these 2 children into the palace? Fan would be the same with Fan Ruoruo. Fan Xian's brows furrowed slightly. In the end, I still underestimated the meticulousness of the Emperor's thoughts. Now that I think about it, the day you decided to send the children back to Danzhou, something had just happened in the royal study. Chen Pingping had just been sent to the Overwatch Council. At that time, the Emperor was heavily injured, but he still did not forget about our children. My arrangements were not thorough. At the time, we shouldn't have waited in the manor. We should have thought of a way to send them directly to Danzhou. A glimmer of darkness flashed through Lin Wan Er's brows. She had not thought that her uncle the Emperor would be so cold and severe that he wouldn't even let go of 2 children. At that time, you could only contact the First Bureau. My people were scattered outside Jingdo. If you wanted to send them to Danzhou, there was no way. Fan Xian gently put his arm around her thin shoulders and comforted her. You've been tired enough these days and worried enough. This has nothing to do with you. Our emperor even dares to use the temple, much less 2 children. Fan Xian gently put his arm around her thin shoulders and comforted, "You've been tired enough these days and worried enough. This has nothing to do with you. Our emperor even dares to use the temple, much less two children. What exactly did you and Qingping talk about in the palace? What exactly did you and Qingping talk about in the palace?" Lin Wan sighed and thought to herself. The entire family was trapped in Jingdou. The emperor did not reveal much of his extraordinary face. Only this faint threat was enough to make Fan Xian and her not dare to act rashly. Thus, she changed the topic and continued to ask the previous question. She also knew about the matter of the concubines. As intelligent as she was, she guessed the emperor's intentions. Thus, she wanted to hear some of Shufang Palace's reaction from Fan Xian. "What can I say?" Fan Xian smiled faintly. "Hongzhu, that little eunuch, has been by my side the entire time. He has the emperor's edict to send me out of the palace. Can Qingping and I kick him aside?" There was an ambush in these words. For the sake of Hongzhu's safety, Fan Xian had kept this secret tightly. Even the third prince did not know the true relationship between him and Hongzhu. Earlier in Shufang Palace, the third prince had been somewhat rude to Hongzhu. However, there is no need to worry too much. After all, Qingping has performed very well these years. How could the emperor bear to have the court fall into chaos again because of my relationship? Fan Xian's brows twitched. In front of Hongzhu, I gave the third prince a good scolding. In any case, it will probably be very difficult for me to enter the palace in the future. I should quickly scold him. It would be best if I can make Qingping truly angry at me. The carriage moved gently along the road. In the distance, the setting sun in the western sky dragged out a long red tail. It brushed across the nearby hills and then the faintly discernible head of Tsang Mountain in the distance. Who can this fool? Lin Wan leaned into his embrace. She felt her heart was unusually heavy. Putting on a show for Hongzhu to see. Will the emperor believe it? Regardless of whether the emperor believes it or not, I will not see Qingping in the future. We will also have to cut off contact in Duke's Alley. It would be best if you don't enter the palace as often. Fan Xian gently stroked her face. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's best if we don't drag other people into our own matters." Lin Wan straightened her body and looked at him calmly. "What do you want the emperor to believe?" "To believe that Qingping does not have true affection for you. Don't forget that big brother is still in Dongyi. Each day he doesn't bring you and your brothers into the palace, the emperor will not be at ease. Isn't the matter of the consort selection clear?" "Correct, it is separation," Fan Xian looked at his wife and said seriously. Fan Xian gazed at his wife and said seriously, "This is a true separation. Even if something happens to me, don't drag Qingping into it. Chen Pingping did this in the past. I also wanted to do this. However, I don't have much foresight, so I prepared much later." Lin Wan sighed helplessly and said, "Based on what you say, the emperor still intends for Qingping to succeed. Then, why is there a consort selection? Just in case." "This kind of thing is easy to understand," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "It's only a 10-month pregnancy. How could it be so easy to have a child? Those beauties are only 14 or 15 years old. If they want to be stepmothers, they will have to endure for a few more years." Speaking of this, Fan Xian sank into deep thought. He thought of the problem of the emperor's masculinity. If one carefully calculated the emperor's age, given his great-grandmaster realm body, the matter between men and women should not be too difficult. However, he was getting older, so his desires would probably grow thinner. Concerning the after-effects of the tyrannical martial secret, Fan Xian knew better than anyone else. Adding to the discussion he had with Sigurd at the end in Dongi, Fan Xian confirmed that the emperor's body no longer had normal meridians. Instead, it had become a completely unobstructed channel or vessel. Only this could allow the physical body to contain so much tyrannical Jinqi. Only then could one point into Ku He's body on Dong Mountain and force a great grandmaster to death. No matter how tyrannical it was still tyrannical. It only had the name of the way of the emperor. How could there be a true change? Fan Xian thought of this and raised his brows slightly. He had proven that the emperor's constitution was cold on the outside and dry on the inside. His breathing disturbed his nature. He would probably need to eat a few more Lingxiang pills. If he didn't have Lingxiang pills to eat, then eating more celery would be good. Garlic. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and thought about the Imperial Academy of Medicine's conclusion. He prayed to the heavens to ensure that a great grandmaster's body was no different from a mortal's body. Celery, garlic, and bean products, particularly the first one, had a powerful killing effect. Without question, only Fan Xian knew this knowledge. The Imperial Academy of Medicine did not know. Hongzhu did not understand. Even the emperor did not know. Whether or not the tricks Fan Xian had done in secret would bear fruit in the future would depend on whether or not the heavens would help him. As long as the emperor had no more children, then the third prince's position would be as stable as Dong Mountain. This was Fan Xian's hope. Perhaps making the emperor have no more children sounded like a sinister plot. However, Fan Xian did not think so. The emperor already had 3 sons. That was enough. If he had more, it would just create more trouble for the Qing kingdom's future in the fight for the throne. At least he didn't make the Li family die without descendants. Thinking of this, Fan Xian thought of Qin Pingping and couldn't resist smiling. I still have the heart to offer my services, but I have no reason to see a wise ruler. Lin Wan was slightly surprised to find that Fan Xian was making another poem. Thinking about it closely, she found that this poem only talked about the grievances of an official. She looked at Fan Xian in a daze and wondered if he was truly willing to forget the death by 1,000 cuts in front of the royal palace and the bloody case in Taiping courtyard decades ago. As for the emperor, Yi Qingmei, Qin Pingping, Fan Jian, and that group of old people, Fan Xian had already told Wan everything. Only now did Lin Wan know that in the shadows of the royal palace and behind history, there were so many heartless choices and vengeance. Thus, she did not have the extravagant hope that Fan Xian would actually stay obediently in the manor. However, she heard these 2 lines of poetry. As she thought this, the carriage arrived at the Fan clan's country estate. The entire clan, young and old, had already received the news ahead of time. They waited obediently outside the country estate for the arrival of the young master and mistress. Although Fan Xian no longer had an official position, he was still the backbone of the Fan clan. Other than the vengeance, he still had to shoulder the people his father had entrusted to him. Dusk shone on the gates of the country. Cici was carrying Fan Liang. Shunning, who was wearing a large flowery farmer's clothing, was holding on to her leg. She looked curiously at her parents who were getting off the carriage. She was already 3 years old and had no problem remembering people. Fan Xian accepted Fan Liang's embrace from Cici's hands and quietly said something by her ear. He then smiled and had the people waiting for him quickly disperse. He then pulled Shunning's small hand and walked into the central room. He asked, "Has Xiaohua been good lately?" When they reached the central room, the well-behaved Shunning let go of her father's hand and threw herself into Lin Wan's arms. Cici was busy making arrangements for the night's rest. Fan Xian turned his eyes and saw a eunuch in the central room. He nodded toward the eunuch. The eunuch's expression was very ugly. There was also a hint of fear on his face. He quickly went forward and kowtowed to Fan Xian before leaving the country estate. The eunuch's figure disappeared through the door. Only then did Ting Zijing walk out on his crutch and spit at the figure's back. "Pay attention to hygiene," Fan Xian said with a smile. In the 4th year of the Qing calendar, Ting Zijing had been heavily injured in order to protect him. One of his legs had been broken by an assassin. Although he had gotten much better after being nursed back to health, he often used a crutch at home. Ting Zijing looked at him and said with shame, "I was useless and was unable to send the young master and young mistress away." He then continued, "I had planned to kill that little eunuch, but I was afraid it would cause trouble for you. Don't look at him just because he's a little eunuch who doesn't know anything. He represents the emperor. How could you casually kill him?" Fan Xian said carelessly. He then touched the large flowery dress Shunning was wearing and said with a smile, "It's quite bright." The wife of the Ting family came out with hot tea. She smiled embarrassedly and replied, "It's third sister-in-law's daughters. It shouldn't have been worn by the young mistress, but..." Ting Zijing scratched his head and said, "These days, there's no way to get news from the manor. The elders in the clan discussed it with my family and thought it would not be difficult to hide it from that little eunuch. We were just worried that there might be an ambush from the court along the way. Thus, we planned to disguise the young mistress and young master as country children. If something happened, we would see if we could secretly send them away." Fan Xian's heart jumped. He knew what the people in the clan were preparing to do. He then thought of the bloody case in Taiping courtyard on Lujing River. Ruoro's biological mother seemed to be like the wife of the Ting family in front of him. His face darkened and he said, "In the future, don't think about such foolish things. How can you hide it from others? Don't harm other people's children for nothing." Seeing that Ting Zijing only made a casual sound of agreement and did not take it seriously, Fan Xian sighed in his heart and scolded, "The elders in the clan can be said to be foolish. How could you all be so foolish?" Fortunately, the Fan Manor had opened and Fan Xian had rushed over. Nothing had happened, so there was no need to say these things now. However, thinking of the clan members who had welcomed him at the entrance of the country estate earlier, even someone as cold as Fan Xian couldn't help but be moved. His heart was moved, but he sank into an even deeper worry. Traveling alone under heaven, he could happily repay kindness and hatred. Even if he spilled his blood and threw away his head, it was all in exchange for no regrets. Chen Pingping still wanted to send the girls in the garden to Dongyi, but there were so many people around Fan Xian. How many could he send away? There was only one life in which to live without regrets. How could it be so easy? Their family did not stay long in the clan estate. After only one night, they picked up their children. The next day, the family of 5 left the manor to return to Jingdou. Just as the emperor had said in the royal study and just as the eldest princess had said one day to her strategist, Fan Xian's weakness was too fatal. As long as he grasped this point, even if he grew wings, where could he escape to? Even if he could escape, would he want to? If he didn't escape, he could only face it. But the snowy mountains were so high and so cold. Holding a pair of children, Fan Xian sat in the carriage with a smile. His gaze occasionally looked through the window at the Tsang Mountains reflecting the white light from the east in the morning. The Tsang Mountains were on the west side of Jingdou. They were far from the official road, but they were tall and majestic, piercing the clouds. It was only early autumn, so the top of the mountain had long been covered in snow, adding a touch of coolness to the world. Do you still remember those 2 years of winter in the Tsang Mountains? Fan Xian suddenly asked. After he said this, expressions of happiness and reminiscence appeared on Lin Wan, and Cici's faces. The first year, Cici had been purposely left behind by Fan Xian in the old manor in Jingdou. The second year, she still went with him. For the young people of the Fan Manor, the snow in the Tsang Mountains could clear their hearts and wash their faces. It was a beautiful little world completely cut off from Jingdo. There, Fan Xian could fully reveal emotions that were different from this world. Regardless of whether it was playing mahjong or chatting, the warm Kong in the winter snow always brought back such memories. The carriage gradually became quiet. Lin Wan thought of Yi Ling and Ro Jia, who occasionally went up the mountain. These days, the Fan Manor in Jingdo had been surrounded. Presumably, Yi Ling was also worried about King Jing's matter in the palace. "How is King Jing?" Lin Wan asked worriedly. "The emperor's anger has subsided. Naturally, he will be allowed to return to the manor. He didn't even punish me, much less him." Fan Xian shook his head. He thought of his brother, Xija. He didn't know if there would be any problems after he heard the news in the north with so many things happening in Jingdo. Sitting by Fan Xian's side, Shunning suddenly looked at the snow on the Tsang Mountains. Pursing her lips, she said in a childish voice, "So high." It was very high. It would be difficult to go up. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and gazed at the top of the Tsang Mountains. He took a deep breath. On that snowy mountain were his most beautiful memories in the Qin kingdom. There was also the time when Uncle Wu Zhu took him to climb the mountain and lie in the snow. He knew how difficult it was to climb to the peak of that snowy mountain. His eyesight was startling. Suddenly, he saw a few eagles circling toward the highest peak of the Tsang Mountains. Unconsciously, he pointed to Shunning and said, "Look, if you can actually go up, it would actually be very beautiful." Chapter 719. Under Hong Zhu's lead, Fan Xian walked silently toward the outside of the royal palace. Along the way, the eunuchs and serving girls he saw all turned their bodies to greet him. Occasionally, a new person who had just entered the palace would not be able to react and would be taught a good lesson by a ranked elder. Fan Xian did not have the energy to pay attention to these things. He just walked blindly. The people in the palace looked at Hong Zhu in front of him and thought that the emperor had reinstated eunuch Hong Jr. It was probably to dirty Sir Fan Jr.'s eyes. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian did not speak harshly to Hong Zhu. On the contrary, he chatted calmly with him. Hong Zhu also maintained his humble appearance and appeared very harmonious. Sir Fan Jr. and eunuch Hong Jr. were not normal people. The people watching this scene all sighed in their hearts. Perhaps only such people, who could hide their true emotions so well, could ensure their own survival and future in the unpredictable changes of the Qin court and palace. In reality, the affairs of the world were strange. In everyone's eyes, the question and answer between Fan Xian and Hong Zhu on the way out of the palace was an act for everyone to see. No one thought that Fan Xian and Hong Zhu were actually talking. Their voices were low, and their expressions were natural. Each of them played their roles well, but the contents of what they said were not normal. "The emperor seems to like those dishes these days," Hong Zhu lowered his head and said obediently. Hong Zhu lowered his head and obediently said, "The Imperial Academy of Medicine has examined them. They are all extremely good ingredients for strengthening one's constitution." Fan Xian's eyes looked straight ahead and did not look at Hong Zhu's face. He gently made a sound of acknowledgement. It was impossible to see the change in his expression. 3 years ago, the rebellion had just been quelled, and the effects of the matter had gradually disappeared. Hong Zhu was taken out of the cold palace. At first, he was helping out in the royal kitchen. He was a person who had once seen great things. Adding to that his own cleverness and Fan Xian's secret help, not only did his days pass by easily, but he also gradually gathered some power in his hands. Later, Hong Zhu followed eunuch Dai to work, but it did not weaken his influence on the royal kitchen. What Hong Zhu said to Fan Xian at this moment was the little secret between the two of them. More accurately, it was Fan Xian's little secret. Even Hongzhu himself did not know why Sir Fan Jr. wanted to influence the food ingredients the royal kitchen sent to the emperor. Hongzhu was not worried that Fan Xian would poison the emperor. In the royal palace, this was not possible. Regardless of whether it was a chronic or acute poison, there would be specialized people to examine it. Additionally, with the food tasting segment, the possibility of poisoning had basically been eliminated. Furthermore, these ingredients that had been secretly influenced by Hongzhu to be added to the recipes also received great praise from the Imperial Academy of Medicine, particularly the celery from the south. Because of its cool nature and sweet taste, it had the effect of clearing away heat and eliminating irritability, as well as curing extreme heat and irritating thirst. It was recommended by the doctors of the Imperial Academy of Medicine to be placed on the emperor's daily dining table. Not being poisonous was the most basic requirement. Hongzhu didn't know if there were any problems with the emperor's body. However, seeing that the celery, which could cure baths, clear away heat, and eliminate irritability, was so highly valued by the Imperial Academy of Medicine, perhaps the emperor's body truly did have internal problems. Hongzhu lowered his head slightly and glanced at Fan Xian. He did not see his true emotions. He thought to himself, in the current situation, Sir Fan Jr. is still worried about the emperor's body. Is he really a loyal official and filial son? Unfortunately, Sir Fan Jr. was a sentimental person. It would probably be difficult for him to let go of Director Chen's death and obtain the emperor's happiness again. The road out of the palace from the royal study was not far. However, Fan Xian had already received an edict earlier to go to Shufang Palace to see Yi Guipin and the third prince. Thus, Hongzhu took him in the direction of the inner palace. The reason the emperor had such an edict was perhaps because, from now on, Fan Xian would truly become an idle person in Jingdou. It would be difficult for him to have another opportunity to enter the palace. Walking outside Shufang Palace, Fan Xian heard waves of young women's laughter coming from inside. His brows furrowed slightly. Why had the royal palace suddenly become so lively? He turned his head to look at Hongzhu and asked, "The madams and young ladies of the Duke's Alley are entering the palace to pay their respects today. Why are there so many people?" "They are the beauties waiting to be selected. Because they have to wait for the candidates sent up by the various provinces next month, these dozen beauties will have to stay in the palace for a bit longer. Guipin has probably summoned them today and will have to follow some rules," Hongzhu replied quietly. Fan Xian listened to this news with a startled expression. For a moment, he could not come back to his senses. These days, he had been under house arrest in the Fan Manor. Later, he had been busy with those secret plans and had not paid attention to the rumors about the consorts in Jingdou. It was not until now that he learned that the emperor was preparing to take a wife again. Just like Yi Guipin and the third prince, Fan Xian did not spend too much time before he sensed the hidden meaning behind the consorts. His brows furrowed. He knew that not only was he moving, but the emperor was also moving. Furthermore, if the emperor did not move, it would be fine. Once he moved, it would be a sword pointing at the future and giving him the strongest warning. There was a glimmer of confusion and apology in his heart. This apology was for the mother and son in Shufang Palace. In this world, there were not many people like the mother and son who truly trusted a powerful aide from outside the palace. This kind of trust was rare. Now, because of him, they were going to face an unpredictable danger. Fan Xian's heart was uneasy. Seeing Fan Xian stand silently in front of Shufang Palace, Hongzhu thought he was thinking that there were beauties inside and that it was not appropriate for him to enter to see the empress and the third prince. In a quiet voice, he asked, "It is my fault. How about you come back another day?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "Why wouldn't I come in? Not following the rules. I have never been a person who abides by the rules." The emperor has given me an edict, so I came to see. If I still don't come to see, who knows when the next opportunity to enter the palace will be. As he spoke, Fan Xian was already striding toward Shufang Palace. The two eunuchs guarding the palace door had come with the beauties. They did not know who Fan Xian was. Seeing a young man wearing a plain cotton robe charging into the palace, they couldn't help but jump in fright. Although they did not know Fan Xian, to be able to stay in the palace, they were all clever people. They did not dare to stop him. One of them followed behind Fan Xian and lowered his voice to greet him. The other charged into Shufang Palace to inform the people inside. Once he entered Shufang Palace, he heard a wave of panicked shouts and the sound of clothes being adjusted. Most of them were curious gazes. Fan Xian had come too quickly. The eunuch did not have time to say anything, and the palace girls did not have time to prepare anything before he entered the palace. Suddenly, countless pairs of eyes focused on him. The atmosphere in the kingdom of Qing was relatively civilized. Although they were deep in the palace, and men and women had to be on guard, suddenly seeing a young man enter the palace, these girls only lowered their voices and exclaimed a few times. They were not so embarrassed that they wanted to die, nor were they so perverted as to cry out loud. Amidst the forcefully suppressed panic, Fan Xian smiled warmly and bowed seriously toward Yi Guipin in the middle. "Auntie, it is quite lively here today." However, Fan Xian had already formally broken off relations with the emperor in the royal study. Although the emperor still had a death grip on his weakness and he couldn't do anything, in terms of his personality, he no longer wanted to hide anything. He faintly revealed a carefree spirit of not caring about anything. Yi Guipin was the sister of Lady Lu. When Fan Xian first entered the palace, she had been very fond of this jade-like little boy. Now that Fan Xian had long grown up, their relationship had long been very close. In private, Yi Guipin always wanted Fan Xian to call her aunt. She had not expected that with so many people in the palace, Fan Xian would still call her like this. Yi Guipin smiled slightly and said, "How old are you to be so cheeky?" These words seemed unhappy, but they were actually a reminder and a question. Fan Xian looked at her and shook his head. He smiled. A glimmer of worry appeared at the corner of Yi Guipin's brows. Fan Xian's behavior today was too strange. It looked like although the conversation in the royal study had not reached the worst result, it did not have any signs of getting better. Thinking of this, Yi Guipin's heart felt like a large stone was pressing down on it. It was heavy. She forced a smile and said, "Why did you want to enter the palace today?" Everyone in the palace knew Fan Xian's purpose for entering the palace. This was just a formality. Fan Xian explained a bit. At this time, Xing'er had already moved an embroidered stool over. This former little serving girl had now become the most senior serving girl in Shufang Palace and had the most power to speak. Fan Xian looked at her delicate face and smiled. He even found a moment to chat casually. Only then did he seriously say to Yi Guipin, "Other than seeing the emperor also ordered me to see the third prince's homework." The worry between Yi Guipin's brows grew stronger and stronger. She thought to herself, "Is he here to say goodbye?" However, the young lady of the Fan family was in the palace, and there were hundreds of people in the Fan manor and the Duke's manor. Would Fan Xian actually dare to leave? For a moment, she couldn't help but have many things she wanted to ask Fan Xian. However, the beauties present were all looking curiously at this young man, so she couldn't ask. Yi Guipin's heart was very irritated. She wanted to chase all of these teenage girls out of the palace. Fan Xian looked at her expression and knew that this concubine had misunderstood. He smiled and said, "Where is the prince?" This was finding an excuse to leave. After all, he was sitting in a room full of the emperor's future concubine. She was like his little stepmother. Fan Xian only wanted to use this opportunity to see the hidden meaning of the concubine selection. He didn't want to stay here forever. Ping'er is in the back. You can go by yourself. Yi Guipin felt a headache coming on. She looked at him and shook her head. The serving girl Xing'er gazed at Fan Xian and smiled. She led him to the back. Hongzhu followed closely behind. In the eyes of the bystanders, this was the emperor ordering Hongzhu to keep an eye on him. As Fan Xian walked into the back of the hall, the atmosphere immediately relaxed. From the moment he entered, the dozen beauties forced themselves to calm down after a slight panic. They wanted to display the bearing of a royal family in front of the concubine. However, looking at the young official's handsome face and confident bearing, how could these girls, who were only 14 or 15 and usually found it difficult to even step out of the front door, completely calm down? What made them curious was how such a young man dressed like a commoner could walk freely in the tightly guarded royal palace. Listening to this person's conversation with Yi Guipin, any of the beauties with a bit of insight guessed that this person was Sir Fan Jr. Unable to stop it, his appearance, which had been so good that it did not seem mortal, immediately gained a bit more luster in the eyes of these beauties. Regardless of whether it was the bold or the shunning, directly or quietly, they all looked at Fan Xian a few more times. At this moment, Fan Xian had left. Finally, a brave girl from the Duke's Alley asked, "Concubine, is this Sir Fan Jr.?" With Yi Guipin's nod of confirmation, these beauties couldn't help but begin to discuss in whispers. After all, they were still young girls. They had been bored in the palace for a few days and had suddenly met the legendary Sir Fan Jr. It was no wonder they were so excited. They had even tossed the admonitions at home before they entered the palace and the warnings of the teaching nannies in the palace to the back of their minds. However, there were a few arrogant beauties who just sat calmly to the side. They had seen something strange from Fan Xian's attire. In addition, these beauties had always seen the young lady of the Fan Manor in the royal study as their greatest enemy. Thus, when they saw Fan Xian today, they were not moved. On the contrary, they felt a faint hostility. Things have already been said to this extent, yet the emperor still wants you to go to Shufang Palace. In a normal carriage, Lin Wan'er looked at the slightly tired Fan Xian beside her. Quietly, she said, "The matter of the consort selection has happened very suddenly. I think the emperor is just giving you a warning. He doesn't have anything against the third prince, so don't worry too much." When they were alone, Fan Xian always referred to the emperor as Old Emperor, while Lin Wan'er referred to the man who had held her growing up as Uncle Emperor. It was not considered disgraceful, but it was somewhat domestic. Today, Lin Wan'er had directly referred to him as Emperor. Fan Xian knew that his wife understood that his mood was very poor. It is also to warn the officials in court not to think that the future Qing kingdom will definitely be the third prince's. He smiled and said, "Although the emperor is old, his ambition is still there. I just don't know if his awe-inspiring spirit is still there." "What did you and Qingping talk about?" Lin Wan'er gently pulled back the curtain of the carriage and looked at the early autumn Jingdo Street scene outside. Chapter 720. The Fan Manor's carriage traveled on the road out of the city. It had just passed the West City Gate and was headed toward the country estate in the distance shrouded in twilight. He entered the palace in the morning and only returned to the manor in the afternoon. Fan Xian did not tarry. He boarded the carriage with Wan'er and went to the country estate on the outskirts. Last night, an edict from the palace had come out. The surveillance of the Fan Manor had completely ended. People had thought that the Cold War between the Emperor and Fan Xian had ended. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian entered the palace to see the Emperor, there was no news of his return from the palace. There wasn't even a related edict. Putting aside what the officials in court and the various powers were guessing, the fact that the Fan Manor's carriage had left just like that still shocked many people. What surprised many people was that the Fan Manor's carriage had smoothly passed through the Jingdo City Guard's inspection. More accurately, it had not been inspected at all. Was the emperor not worried that Sir Fan Jr. would leave Jingdo in a fit of anger? Although the emperor's household did not have children running away in anger, the scene on the execution field, as well as the disputes these days, made people scratch their heads in confusion about Fan Xian's response. Many people were worried whether or not Fan Xian would leave Jingdo. It was clear that the emperor was not worried. Otherwise, he would not have removed all the surveillance outside the Fan Manor or given Fan Xian such freedom. My sister is in the palace, and the emperor's edict has been sent out. The subordinates and relatives who rely on me to live are all in Jingdo. How can I leave? Fan Xian tilted his head and looked at the autumn scenery illuminated by the red twilight outside Jingdo. In a quiet voice, he said, "Bring back Xiaohua and Liangzi. Let's live well in the manor." Lin Wan's heart trembled slightly. She didn't know if Fan Xian's words came from the bottom of his heart or if they contained some other meaning. If staying in the Fan Manor and being an idle person was the emperor's edict, then Lin Wan knew why Fan Xian was forced to accept this edict. The Fan Manor had received a bad piece of news when it opened. That day, Lin Wan had made a decision at the first instant. She had Ting Zijing take the young mistress and the young master to the Fan Manor outside the city. She was worried that something would happen later and was prepared to quietly take the children back to Danzhou. However, the country estate had only sent news today. It turned out that the carriages taking the children had arrived at the country estate and could no longer leave. It was not that there were soldiers waiting there. Rather, a eunuch was already waiting. Under these circumstances, Ting Zijing did not dare to act rashly. If he truly secretly sent the young master and mistress back to Danzhou, who knew if something would happen on the way? Would the court shed all pretenses of cordiality and snatch these two children into the palace? Just like Fan Ruoruo. Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly and said, "In the end, I still underestimated the meticulousness of the emperor's thoughts. Now that I think about it, the day you decided to send the children back to Danzhou, something had just happened in the royal study. Chen Pingping had just been sent to the Overwatch Council. At that time, the emperor was heavily injured, but he still did not forget about our children." The glimmer of a cold smile rose to the corners of his lips. Truly, the emperor's kindness is vast and mighty. As officials, we should thank him. It was my lack of thorough arrangements. Back then, we shouldn't have waited in the country estate. We should have thought of a way to send them directly to Danzhou. A glimmer of darkness flashed through Lin Wan's brows. She had not thought that her uncle the emperor would be so cold and severe that he wouldn't even let go of two children. At that time, the most you could contact was the first bureau. My people were all scattered outside Jingdo. If you wanted to send them to Danzhou, there was no way. Fan Xian gently put his arm around her thin shoulders and comforted her. You've been tired enough these days and worried enough. This has nothing to do with you. Our emperor even dares to use the temple, much less two children. What exactly did you and Qingping talk about in the palace? Lin Wan sighed and thought to herself that the entire family was trapped in Jingdo. The emperor did not show much of his extraordinary face. Only this faint threat was enough to make Fan Xian and her not dare to act rashly. Thus, she changed the topic and continued to ask the previous question. She also knew about the matter of the concubines. As intelligent as she was, she guessed the emperor's intentions. Thus, she wanted to hear some of Shufang Palace's reaction from Fan Xian. What can I say? Fan Xian smiled faintly and said, Hongzhu, that little eunuch, has been by my side the entire time. He has the emperor's edict to send me out of the palace. Can Qingping and I kick him aside? There was an ambush in these words. For the sake of Hongzhu's safety, Fan Xian had kept this secret tightly. Even the third prince did not know the true relationship between him and Hongzhu. Earlier in Shufang Palace, the third prince had indeed been rude to Hongzhu. However, there is no need to worry too much. After all, Qingping has performed very well these years. How could the emperor bear to have the court fall into chaos again because of my relationship? Fan Xian's brows twitched. In front of Hongzhu, I gave the third prince a good scolding. In any case, it will probably be very difficult for me to enter the palace in the future. I should quickly scold him. It would be best if I can make Qingping truly angry at me. The carriage moved gently along the road. In the distance, the setting sun in the western sky dragged out a long red tail. It brushed across the nearby hills and then the faintly discernible head of Tsang Mountain in the distance. Who do you think you can fool? Lin Wan-er leaned into his embrace. Her mood was unusually heavy. Putting on a show for Hongzhu to see. Will the emperor believe it? Regardless of whether the emperor believes it or not, I will not see Qingping in the future. We will also have to cut off contact in Duke's Alley. It would be best if you don't enter the palace as often. Fan Xian gently stroked her face. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's best if we don't drag other people into our own matters." Lin Wan-er straightened her body and looked at him calmly. What do you want the emperor to believe? To believe that Qingping does not have true affection for you. Don't forget that big brother is still in Dongyi. Each day he doesn't bring you and your brothers into the palace, the emperor will not be at ease. Isn't the matter of the consort selection clear? Correct, it is a separation. Fan Xian gazed at his wife and said seriously, it is a true separation. Even if something happens to me, don't drag Qingping into it. Chen Pingping did this in the past. I also wanted to do this. However, I don't have much foresight, so I prepared much later. Lin Wan sighed helplessly and said, based on what you say, the emperor still intends for Qingping to inherit the throne. Then, why is there a consort selection? Just in case. This kind of thing is easy to understand, Fan Xian smiled slightly. It's only a 10-month pregnancy. How could it be so easy to have a child? Those beauties are only 14 or 15 years old. If they want to be stepmothers, they will have to endure a bit longer. Speaking of this, Fan Xian sank into deep thought. He thought of the problem of the emperor's masculinity. If one carefully calculated the emperor's age, given his great-grandmaster realm body, the matter between men and women should not be too difficult. However, he was getting older, so his desires would probably grow thinner. Concerning the repercussions of the tyrannical martial secret, Fan Xian knew better than anyone. Adding to the discussion he had with Siga Jian at the end in Dongyi, Fan Xian confirmed that the emperor's body no longer had normal meridians. Instead, it had become like a completely unobstructed channel or vessel. Only this could allow the physical body to contain so much tyrannical Jinqi. Only then could he use one finger to guide half a lake into Ku He's body and forcefully fill a great grandmaster to death. No matter how tyrannical it was still tyrannical. It only had the name of the way of the emperor. How could there be a true change? Fan Xian thought of this and raised his brows slightly. He had proven that the emperor's constitution was cold on the outside and dry on the inside. His breathing disturbed his nature. He probably needed to eat a few more Lingxiang pills. If he didn't have Lingxiang pills to eat, then eating more celery would be good. Garlic. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and thought about the Imperial Academy of Medicine's conclusion. He prayed to the heavens to ensure that a great grandmaster's body was no different from a mortal's body. Celery, garlic, and bean products, particularly the first one, had a powerful killing effect. Without question, only Fan Xian knew this knowledge. The Imperial Academy of Medicine did not know. Hongzhu did not understand. Even the Emperor did not know. Whether or not the tricks Fan Xian did in secret would bear fruit in the future would depend on whether or not the heavens would help. As long as the Emperor did not have any more children, then the third prince's position would be as stable as Dong Mountain. This was Fan Xian's hope. Perhaps making the Emperor have no more children sounded like a sinister plot. However, Fan Xian did not think so. The Emperor already had 3 sons. That was enough. If he had more, it would just create more trouble for the Qin kingdom in the fight for the throne. At least, he did not make the Li family die without descendants. Thinking of this, Fan Xian thought of Qin Pingping and couldn't resist smiling. I still have the heart to offer, but have no reason to see a wise ruler. Lin Wan was slightly surprised to find that Fan Xian was making another rare poem. Thinking about it closely, she found that this poem only talked about the grievances of an official. She looked at Fan Xian in a daze and wondered if he was truly willing to forget the death by 1,000 cuts in front of the royal palace and the bloody case in Taiping courtyard decades ago. As for the emperor, Yi Qingmei, Qin Pingping, Fan Jian, and that group of old people, Fan Xian had already told Wan everything. Only now did Lin Wan know that in the shadows of the royal palace and behind history, there were so many heartless choices and vengeance. Thus, she did not have the extravagant hope that Fan Xian would actually obediently stay in the manor as an idle person. However, she heard these 2 lines of poetry. As she thought this, the carriage arrived at the Fan clan's country estate. The entire clan, young and old, had already received the news ahead of time. They waited obediently outside the country estate for the arrival of the young master and mistress. Although Fan Xian no longer had an official position, he was still the backbone of the Fan clan. Other than the vengeance, he still had to shoulder the people his father had entrusted to him. Dusk shone on the gates of the country. Cici was carrying Fan Liang. Shunning, who was wearing a large flowery farmer's clothing, was holding on to her leg. She looked curiously at her parents who were getting off the carriage. She was already 3 years old and had no problem remembering people. Fan Xian accepted Fan Liang's embrace from Cici's hands and quietly said something by her ear. He then smiled and had the people waiting for him quickly disperse. He then pulled Shunning's small hand and walked into the central room. He asked, "Has Xiaohua been good lately?" When they reached the central room, the well-behaved Shunning let go of her father's hand and threw herself into Lin Wan's arms. Cici was busy making arrangements for the night's rest. Fan Xian turned his eyes and saw a eunuch in the central room. He nodded toward the eunuch. The eunuch's expression was very ugly. There was also a hint of fear on his face. He quickly went forward and kowtowed to Fan Xian before leaving the country estate. The eunuch's figure disappeared through the door. Only then did Ting Zijing walk out on his crutch and spit at the figure's back. "Pay attention to hygiene," Fan Xian said with a smile. In the 4th year of the Qing calendar, Ting Zijing had been heavily injured in order to protect him. One of his legs had been broken by an assassin. Although he had gotten much better after being nursed back to health, he often used a crutch at home. Ting Zijing looked at him and said with shame, "I was useless and was unable to send the young master and young mistress away." He then continued, "I had planned to kill that little eunuch, but I was afraid it would cause trouble for you. Don't look at him just because he's a little eunuch who doesn't know anything. He represents the emperor. How could you casually kill him?" Fan Xian said carelessly. He then touched the large flowery dress Shunning was wearing and said with a smile, "It's quite bright." The wife of the Ting family came out with hot tea. She smiled embarrassedly and replied, "It's third sister-in-law's daughters." It shouldn't have been worn by the young mistress, but... Ting Zijing scratched his head and said, "These days, there's no way to get news from the manor. The elders in the clan discussed it with my family and thought it would not be difficult to hide it from that little eunuch. They were just worried that there might be an ambush from the court along the way. Thus, they planned to disguise the young mistress and young master as country children. If something happened, we would see if we could secretly send them away." Fan Xian's heart jumped. He knew what the people in the clan were preparing to do. He then thought of the bloody case in Taiping Courtyard on Lujing River. Ruoro's biological mother seemed to be like the wife of the Ting family in front of him. His face darkened and he said, "In the future, don't think about such foolish things. How can you hide it from others? Don't harm other people's children for nothing." Seeing that Ting Zijing only made a casual sound of agreement and did not take it seriously, Fan Xian sighed in his heart and scolded, "The elders in the clan can be said to be foolish. How could you all be so foolish?" Fortunately, the Fan Manor had opened and Fan Xian had rushed over. Nothing had happened, so there was no need to say these things now. However, thinking of the clan members who had welcomed him at the entrance of the country estate earlier, even someone as cold as Fan Xian couldn't help but be moved. His heart was moved, but he sank into an even deeper worry. Traveling alone under heaven, he could happily repay kindness and enmity. Even if he spilled his blood and threw away his head, it was all in exchange for no regrets. Chen Pingping still wanted to send the girls in the garden to Dongyi, but there were so many people around Fan Xian. How many could he send away? There was only one life in which to have no regrets. It was not an easy matter. Their family did not stay long in the clan estate. After only one night, they picked up their children. The next day, the family of 5 left the manor to return to Jingdou. Just as the emperor had said in the royal study and just as the eldest princess had said one day to her strategist, Fan Xian's weakness was too fatal. As long as he grasped this point, even if he grew wings, where could he escape to? Even if he could escape, would he want to? If he didn't escape, he could only face it. But the snowy mountains were so high and so cold. Holding a pair of children, Fan Xian sat in the carriage with a smile. His gaze occasionally looked through the window at the Tsang Mountains reflecting the white light from the east in the morning. The Tsang Mountains were on the west side of Jingdou. They were far from the official road, but they were tall and majestic, piercing the clouds. It was only early autumn, so the top of the mountain had long been covered in snow, adding a touch of coolness to the world. Do you still remember those 2 years of winter in the Tsang Mountains? Fan Xian suddenly asked. After he said this, expressions of happiness and reminiscence appeared on Lin Wan, and Cici's faces. The first year, Cici had been purposely left behind by Fan Xian in the old manor in Jingdou. The second year, she still went with him. For the young people of the Fan Manor, the snow in the Tsang Mountains could clear their hearts and wash their faces. It was a beautiful little world completely cut off from Jingdou. There, Fan Xian could fully reveal emotions that were different from this world. Regardless of whether it was playing mahjong or chatting, the warm Kong in the winter snow always brought back such memories. The carriage gradually grew quiet. Lin Wan thought of Yiling and Ro Jia, who occasionally went up the mountain. These days, the Fan Manor in Jingdou had been surrounded. Presumably, Yiling was worried sick outside. Other than worrying about the Fan Manor, Ro Jia was probably also worried about King Jing's matter in the palace. How is King Jing? Lin Wan asked worriedly. The emperor's anger has subsided. Naturally, he will be allowed to return to the manor. He didn't even punish me, much less him. Fan Xian shook his head. He thought of his brother, Xija. He didn't know if there would be any problems after he heard the news in the north with so many things happening in Jingdou. Sitting by Fan Xian's side, Shunning suddenly looked at the snow on the Tsang Mountains. Pursing her lips, she said in a childish voice, "So high." It was very high and difficult to go up. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and gazed at the top of the Tsang Mountains. He took a deep breath. On that snowy mountain were his most beautiful memories in the Qin kingdom. There was also the time when Uncle Wu Zhu took him to climb the mountain and lie in the snow. He knew how difficult it was to climb to the peak of that snowy mountain. His eyesight was startling. Suddenly, he saw a few eagles circling around and doing their best to fly toward the highest peak of the Tsang Mountains. Unconsciously, he pointed to Shunning and said, "Look, if you can actually go up, it is actually very beautiful." Chapter 721. In the spring, if he planted a lot of corn, would he be able to harvest a lot in the autumn? Perhaps in the eyes of many people, sowing melons and getting melons, sowing beans, reaping what you sow, karma begets karma, hard work makes up for one's lack of talent, and it was best to fish for some reward. After Fan Xian came to Jingdou from Danzhou, he had worked his life out for the Qin court many times and brought a lot of good fortune to the people. Although he was not a righteous and benevolent person, he had, either automatically or consciously, planted a lot of good fortune. Unfortunately, by the autumn of the 10th year of the Qin calendar, no good fortune had come. All of his official positions had been taken away, and all of his power had been taken away. All of the family he cared about had become disguised hostages. He had become a commoner. He had become a wealthy man of leisure who could only listen to songs and wander around Baoyue brothel. No one dared to speak up for him, and no one dared to plead for him to His Majesty. All the officials and citizens just calmly watched the scene unfold. They even watched it calmly, showing kindness without asking for repayment. Did Fan Xian have this kind of mentality? No one knew. In people's eyes, Sir Fan Jr., no, the little duke, no, Fan Xian had perfectly played the role of a wealthy man of leisure since the autumn. All he did was stroll the streets and alleys of Jingdou, soak in Baoyue brothel, play with the children in the manor, gossip with the women in the family, and read the new novels published by Donbo bookstore. The Donbo medical shop across the door from the bookstore was still open. The doctors of the Imperial Academy of Medicine were replacing Fan Ruoro in practicing medicine among the people. No one knew if this was the condition the icy woman in the palace had made to the emperor. In any case, the young lady of the Fan family remained deep in the palace. Fan Xian had no way of entering the palace to see her. He could only change his original idea and ask his wife to enter the palace many times to see. Just like this, a month passed peacefully. The Fan manor was so quiet that it was almost forgotten by the people of Jingdou. Fan Xian was so silent that he was almost about to disappear in people's discussions. However, there was one place that could not forget Fan Xian. It was the Imperial College. Although the emperor's edict had taken away all of Fan Xian's official positions, he had thrown him an empty position as a teacher of the Imperial College. About 20 days ago, perhaps because it was too boring to be a wealthy idler in the manor, Fan Xian finally fought his way out of the land of gentleness and began to attend classes at the Imperial College. The Imperial College, surrounded by ancient trees, was as quiet and secluded as usual. The news that Fan Xian was coming to the Imperial College to teach stirred up the students. In the open space in front of the Qingxin pond, one could often see hundreds of people gathered together and listening with great interest. Fan Xian's habit was to give lectures to these students at the stone steps in front of the Qingxin pool. Because there were too many students who came to listen to his lectures, the Imperial College could not arrange for all of them. They could only listen to his mischievous suggestion and place the class between heaven and earth. Some people couldn't help but think that perhaps Fan Xian just wanted to use the endless autumn rain to be able to talk less. The content of the class was actually very simple. It was mainly about the collections of histories and classics that the great Northern Qi scholar, Sir Zhuang Mohan, had used his entire life's work to compile. The Qing Imperial College had used a number of years of effort and, with the great support of Donbo Bookstore, had long sorted through that carriage of books. Fan Xian was also relatively familiar with these books. When he spoke of the allusions in them, he did not need to have stage fright. Of course, Fan Xian's lectures were different. Basically, each time, he arranged for a few teachers to speak frankly and with assurance in front of the Qingxin pool. In the end, he would personally take the stage and debate with the students below the steps. As for the contents of the debate, because it was a bit disrespectful, it did not spread outside the Imperial College. Although Fan Xian was nothing right now, at least in the Imperial College and in the hearts of these young students, he was still a very remarkable figure. At least, he was a person with some special privileges. Fan Xian lazily ended the day's classes and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the red-faced and thick-necked students' unrelenting verbal attacks. Clapping his hands, he walked down the stone steps and said, "I told you a long time ago, I can basically only memorize the classics and classics. If you want me to say something profound and meaningful, I can't say it clearly. Although I understand the principle of sending troops with a good reason, how can there be such a thing as a righteous battle in this world? It's nothing more than an excuse. The Qing kingdom's mighty army points its sword to the world. Naturally, it is for the sake of saving the people." The student brought a dozen friends and caught up to Fan Xian's butt. Very unconvinced, he said something. Today's topic touched on the period when the Wei Kingdom was founded. Using plain words, both sides were analyzing the problem of the righteousness of war. Yet, this problem was the one that Fan Xian could not explain clearly. He also believed that not many people in the world could explain it clearly. Fan Xian got into the carriage and left the Imperial College. He no longer paid attention to the students who were still angry and dissatisfied behind him. The carriage traveled for a while on the streets of Jingdou. It then escaped the liveliness of the Imperial College's silence and returned to the clear autumn scenery. He unconsciously pulled open the curtains and looked at the scenery outside with a smile. However, he could not hide the sliver of melancholy between his brows. He had been a wealthy and idle person for a month. This was only a superficial appearance. He just wanted to create an appearance for the court and the palace to see. In Fan Xian's heart, there had always been a fire that was the complete opposite of his outward calm and happiness. However, this fire had been suppressed very well by him. Furthermore, he was forced to suppress it because the situation at hand still did not give him any opportunity to take advantage of. After returning to Jingdou, Fan Xian had never returned to the Overwatch Council, particularly after he had completely exiled the members of the Qinian unit from the capital. Even contacting the First Bureau had become difficult. However, this did not mean that Fan Xian did not have other sources of information. He knew that in only a month, the Emperor had, with Yan Bingyun's valiant assistance, successfully suppressed most of the unstable elements in the Overwatch Council. The work of changing the blood was also progressing methodically. It was just a matter of when it would be completely cleaned out. The news from Jiangnan was also not very good. All of these signs were the source of Fan Xian's worry. He found that he had still underestimated the control and power of imperial power in a feudal society. Even the Overwatch Council that Chen Pingping and he had worked hard to run for decades was developing in a direction of submission under the coercion of imperial power. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The problem between him and the Emperor appeared to be in the Overwatch Council, the Palace Treasury, and Jingdou. In reality, it was under the heavens. All of the Qing court officials, the wise people among the people, and even Hu the scholar and Yan Bingyun, did not understand this. Thus, they did not understand why the Emperor would deal with Fan Xian like this. He had taken away all of Fan Xian's official positions and power. yet allowed Fan Xian to live freely in Jingdou and still maintain a secret influence. Fan Xian's present state was neither dead nor alive. Only he and the emperor knew why this state was. If it was just to deal with Fan Xian alone, the emperor was much stronger than him. Without any effort, he could knock Fan Xian into the dust and then step on him so that he would never be able to rise again. The problem was that outside Jingdou and even outside the Qin kingdom's borders, Fan Xian's secret influence was terrifyingly powerful. Even with the emperor's confidence and pride, he could not underestimate this level of valiance. Thus, the emperor had Fan Xian stay in Jingdou, neither dead nor alive. Then, he slowly and steadily whittled away at Fan Xian's influence outside Jingdou. At the same time, he had to cut off Fan Xian's invisible hands that stretched outside the country's borders. This was a process of quantitative change leading to qualitative change. If he did not eliminate Fan Xian's influence to the point where the Qin court could bear the risk, the emperor would not actually kill him. Even if Fan Xian died, if Dongyi and Xiliang truly fell into chaos, the emperor would not want to see this scene. If the emperor could perfectly control these problems, then what was so important about Fan Xian's life or death? The carriage arrived at Baoyue brothel with familiarity. Fan Xian got off the carriage and entered the building with his hands behind his back. He walked directly toward the courtyard by the lake in the back. He didn't even glance at the figure at the end of the street behind him. The person watching Fan Xian was an ascetic monk. No one knew how many ascetic monks were watching him in secret. The problem was that ascetic monks could not get close to women. Fan Xian entered Baoyue brothel, so they couldn't follow. Passing through the slightly cool lake surface and the breeze, Fan Xian walked into the courtyard that had been set aside for him. Looking at the increasingly charming and beautiful brothel owner in front of him, he smiled and said, "What new songs do you have to listen to today?" Shi Qing covered her mouth and smiled. "Young master doesn't write poetry anymore. Where would there be any good songs for you to listen to?" It had already been a number of years since Fan Xian had searched the brothel. Yet, this Shi Qing woman did not show any signs of aging. Fan Xian looked at her with narrowed eyes and smiled. He didn't say anything more. In reality, there was no need for the spies of the internal court to keep an eye on him. Everyone in Jingdou knew that Sir Fan Jr. had long become a half-crippled rich man of leisure. His greatest pleasure was to come find the girls in Baoyue brothel. A rich man of leisure. Fan Xian truly lived up to this reputation. Although he had no official position or power, he still had money. No one knew exactly how much gold and silver was hidden in the Fan Manor. On the surface, the Baoyue brothel and the Fan Manor had long swallowed up most of the high-class brothels in the world with the strength of the Qin kingdom and the protection of the Overwatch Council these years. Under the rules and regulations Fan Xian had single-handedly made, Baoyue brothel had already opened all over the world. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it had already unified the brothel industry. Baoyue brothel's nominal owners and shopkeepers, Shi Chanli and Sang Wen, were still developing businesses in Dongyi. They had already extended their hands into northern Qi Shangjing. Everything was going smoothly. No matter where they were prominent figures. Of course, everyone knew that Fan Xian stood behind them. Fan Xian lay on the soft couch and contentedly accepted the two girls' massages. His eyes were closed, but his brain was spinning quickly. Baoyue brothel was, in the end, an industry. The court could not be too shameless about it. The palace also did not want to completely destroy the Fan Manor's reputation, so they had left Fan Xian such a comfortable place. What comforted him the most was that it was clear that the people of this era had, in the end, underestimated the usefulness of a brothel in terms of intelligence. A few years ago, Fan Xixia and the third prince, these two brats, were lawless and out of control. They had created a business that had now become one of Fan Xian's trump cards. What excuse did the court use for Su Wenmao's dismissal? Fan Xian asked with slightly lowered eyes after the courtyard had quieted down. As Fan Xian's trusted aide and a court official, Su Wenmao could not leave his post without permission. He could only wait helplessly for the court to act. Not long ago, an edict had been sent directly to the 3 large workshops in North Min to bring Su Wenmao back to the capital. This was originally a very secretive matter. Because of the existence of Baoyue brothel, Fan Xian knew about it earlier than most people in Jingdou. Because he had long been mentally prepared, Fan Xian was not shocked or angry. He only thought worriedly about whether the people the Qinian little group had sent to North Min had been explained clearly to Su Wenmao. He believed that Su Wenmao, a cheerful second in command, would not stupidly oppose the court head-on. However, he was worried that time was too tight and Su Wenmao would not be able to arrange enough people in the palace treasury. The palace treasury was Fan Xian's second route. The palace treasury transport company had already been completely taken over by the emperor, but Fan Xian would not allow this route to be directly cut off by the palace. If it was to be cut, it had to be done by Fan Xian. Furthermore, once the knife was cut down, it would make the Qin court feel bone-deep pain. Thinking of this, he thought of the heavily guarded 10-family village to the north of Dongyi, the 3 large workshops, the royal palace, and the one in his mind. A glimmer of a smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. The hands in his sleeves slowly tightened into fists. In Shiliang Road, Deng Ziyu had successfully escaped from the court's secret net. However, no one knew where he was hiding. Since there was no news of Deng Ziyu's death in the intelligence reports, Fan Xian felt very comforted. However, the members of the 4th Bureau were now without a leader. He didn't know if they could withstand the pressure from the Overwatch Council in Jingdou. The order Hong Yiqing had received was to first go into the grasslands to find that person and then come back to contact the powers in Dingzhou and Qingzhou. He hoped that everything would be in time. Gong Dian has already arrived in Dingzhou, Shi Qing said with her head lowered. Fan Xian was silent and speechless. He had indeed not thought that the emperor's reaction would be so fast. He had actually moved the commander of the imperial army directly to Dingzhou to hold down the fort. Although Li Hongqing had led troops in Dingzhou for a number of years, his foundations were still shallow. Gong Dian was also an old member of the Dingzhou army. His experience and contributions were there. Hongqing would probably not be able to withstand it and would be forced back to Jingdou. If he wanted to think of a way for Hongqing to remain in Dingzhou and control a portion of the military power that belonged to him, then he had to make Shiliang fall into chaos first. Fan Xian furrowed his brows tightly. He realized that everything had long left his control. He could only hope that the first group of people he sent to the grasslands would be able to quickly contact Hugu and have the Hu people on the grasslands go against the heavens and first launch an attack in this early winter. Things were too chaotic and complicated. How could Fan Xian truly be idle? He glanced at Shi Qing helplessly and asked, "How is the investigation of the Ministry of Works corruption case going?" Sir Yang. Shi Qing glanced at him worriedly. Yesterday, the case was decided. This afternoon, the Supreme Court will issue a clear verdict. Although she had once belonged to the second prince, under Fan Xian's coercion these years, she had long been unable to have second thoughts. Furthermore, as a woman from a brothel, she knew that the young man in front of her was faintly different from all the nobles in Jingdou. She wanted to be the second Sang Wen but not the second Yuan Mang. Thus, seeing Sir Fan Jr.'s right and left arms being torn off one by the court, she couldn't help but feel terrified and afraid. Fan Xian glanced at the light on the surface of the lake. He was silent for a moment and then said, "It's afternoon. I'll go get him." From the time the case of Yang Wanli, the vice minister of the river department of the Ministry of Works, was reported to the time the case was handed from the Ministry of Justice to the Supreme Court had only taken a dozen days. This kind of efficiency was enough to make one sigh in admiration even in the history of the Qin kingdom. Those who didn't know the inside story would probably think that the emperor's edict to clean up the bureaucracy had suddenly become real in the Qin kingdom's 10 years. As for the true officials, when they saw this scene, they couldn't help but sigh and feel cold. Because they all knew what kind of person Yang Wanli was. He was a capable and honest official who had endured for 2 whole years on the embankment of the great river. Yang Wanli was one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. The silver that Sir Fan Jr. had privately raised had flowed like water through the river transport governor's yamen and into the riverbanks. It had all passed through his hands. If he had truly wanted to be greedy, it would not have been the few thousand liang of silver stated in the crime report. Instead of eating the fat meat, he was going to take the bribes from the Ministry of Works yamen. Furthermore, all of the officials knew that Yang Wanli's family was very strict and treated his subordinates very leniently. Putting aside the Overwatch Council's salary that was many times that of court officials, just the 3 officials who held positions in the Qin kingdom were actually supported by the Fan Manor every year. A mere few thousand liang of silver was not a difficult matter. Everyone knew that the Fan Manor was the foremost god of wealth in the world. How could Yang Wanli be greedy? It was precisely because they knew this that the officials knew that Yang Wanli's trial was only the palace's idea. Under the single-handedly arranged by Scholar He of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, the trial proceeded quickly. Today, the Supreme Court was going to pass judgment. According to some insider information, if the scholar had not taken pity on Yang Wanli's talent and forcefully interfered, Sir Yang's fate would probably have been even worse. Fan Xian stood alone in front of the door of the Supreme Court yamen, alone and waiting for the result of the judgment inside. The bailiffs outside the Supreme Court yamen had long recognized his identity and were frightened. They had long sent word to the people inside to know, but they could only stand trembling in front of Fan Xian. Fortunately, Fan Xian did not fly into a rage. He only waited silently for Yang Wanli to come out. The yamen closest to the Supreme Court was the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. The little bastards of the First Bureau discovered that the director was here and couldn't resist standing outside the door of the yamen, forcefully suppressing their excitement as they watched this scene. The First Bureau was Fan Xian's old nest. Back then, the rectification had created a group of loyal subordinates. Otherwise, there would not have been a large group of First Bureau officials escorting him out of the city when he made a scene at the execution field that day. Although Mu Tai had long been kicked out of the Overwatch Council, these officials still saw Fan Xian as the director and refused to accept Yan Bingyun. However, the Qin law and the council were strict. These officials could only watch the lonely Fan Xian from a distance and give him moral support. Fan Xian did not turn his head to look at those children. He continued to look at the Supreme Court yamen. A comforting smile rose to his face. A mighty sound rang out from inside the yamen. Before long, the former litigation master of the Overwatch Council, Jingdo's richest mouth, Song Shiren, silently walked out of the Supreme Court yamen. There was no joy on his face. On the contrary, there was a hint of darkness. Ever since Fan Xian had been stripped of his position as the director of the Overwatch Council, Song Shiren, a non-staff member, did not want to stay in the Overwatch Council anymore. Instead, he had come directly to find Fan Xian. Fan Xian had not thought that this rich mouth would have such a grateful side. After feeling slightly surprised, he settled him down. Coincidentally, the court was beginning to clean up Fan Xian's people. For the sake of the court's face, they could not use the methods of special agents. Everything had to respect the Qin law. Thus, Fan Xian had sent him out. At least, he had to help his subordinates obtain a relatively fair ending. Looking at Song Shiren's expression, Fan Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. Right now, I can't enter the yamen. That's why I'm asking you. We've all seen the case. There's no reason we can't win. We know that the court has arranged for witnesses and evidence, but there's nothing we can do. Song Shiren sighed and looked at Fan Xian. Didn't you also use this method to punish the Ming family in Jiangnan? Fan Xian's heart trembled slightly. His voice was suppressed to a cold line. In a stern voice, he said, I don't expect to help Wanli escape punishment. However, the victory I speak of, at least. I have to see him right now. 3 years in prison. Song Shiren said dejectedly. Working for Sir Fan Jr. was like going against the entire court on his own. No matter how he fought this case, he would lose. How can there be such a thing as a prisoner? Fan Xian angrily rebuked him. 3,000 taels of silver, at most 3,000 li. The law of the Qing kingdom clearly states that returning the stolen goods and returning the money can be considered a crime. How did you fight this lawsuit? Song Shiren wanted to say something but stopped. He forced a smile and said, naturally, the Qing law is written like this. Originally, returning the stolen money and discussing the crime had already been agreed upon yesterday. However, when scholar he came to see the trial today, he erased this clause and changed it to imprisonment. His own way. Hearing this familiar name, Fan Xian did not get angry. On the contrary, he smiled. After a moment of silence, he took out a banknote from his clothes. Restraining his expression, he calmly said, Go in again and give this banknote to the official of the Supreme Court. Ask him how exactly did he learn the Qing law. Do you want me to personally stand out and fight this lawsuit with him? Song Shiren accepted the banknote and looked at the 30,000 liang on it. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and walked back up the yamen. He knew that Fan Xian had done this because he had been forced by the court into a corner. For the sake of Yang Wanli's life and death, Fan Xian could only stand out and sell his not-so-old face. It all depended on what the officials of the Supreme Court would think. No one knew what Song Shiren said after he went in. Before long, an official coughed gently and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. He said something by Fan Xian's ear. Fan Xian did not reply. He only shook his head. The official's expression was helpless as he walked back. Finally, Song Shiren helped Yang Wanli out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He could see that Yang Wanli had been tortured in the prison. A dark fire surged in his heart, but he took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed it. He called for a few servants to lift Yang Wanli into the carriage. Yang Wanli brushed past him. This teacher and student, who were very close in age, did not say anything. However, a glimmer of dissatisfaction flashed through Yang Wanli's eyes, as well as a glimmer of grief and anger. Fan Xian felt a chill. He knew what Yang Wanli was grieving and angry about. An official who wholeheartedly wanted to do something, yet because of these trivial matters in the court and royal palace, he had to endure an injustice that he did not have. Not only would he lose his position and be tortured, but his reputation would also be tarnished. As a scholar, who could bear this? Just as Fan Xian was preparing to leave, the scholar of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, He Zhongwei, accompanied by a few officials, slowly walked out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. He Zhongwei looked at Fan Xian and was silent for a moment. He then said, Master Fan, you are very elegant. Fan Xian couldn't even be bothered to glance at him. This attitude made the officials by He Zhongwei's side angry. The situation in Jingdo was no longer what it was in the past. He Zhongwei was currently popular, but Fan Xian had long been a commoner. To not answer an official's question in front of him was against the rules. He Zhongwei did not have any emotional reaction. He asked, I am very curious. What exactly did you say to that official earlier for the official of the Supreme Court to suddenly change his mind? This was something that scholar he was very curious about. He often entered the palace and knew that the crack between the emperor and Sir Fan Jr. could no longer be mended. Thus, when he looked at Fan Xian now, he was not as afraid as he had been in the past. He had come to the hearing by imperial edict. He had secretly done something to ensure that Yang Wanli, one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, would never have a chance to rise again. He had not expected that everything, which had gone according to plan, would suddenly change. It was clear that this young man was no longer favored by the emperor and held no official position. Why had the officials of the Supreme Court been frightened back by his words? He Zhongwei thought hard but could not understand. He didn't know what kind of magic Fan Xian had to make these officials not even listen to the emperor's hints. Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him coldly. I said to that official, don't force me to act out. You want to force me to act out? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at He Zhongwei's slightly dark face. Suddenly, he smiled slightly and said, actually, I also want to know. What can you do to me when I flatter an official of the court on the street? After these words were said, the officials at He Zhongwei's side finally understood that Fan Xian's power did not just lie in official position and power. They took a step back in fright, but He Zhongwei continued to stand calmly in front of Fan Xian. He sighed. Understanding the reason, he couldn't help but feel some regret. In terms of official position and power, he might be able to suppress him. However, in the face of ruthless and unreasonable killing, he would never be as arrogant as him. The Suzhou Zhizhou, Qing Jialin, was accused of visiting a prostitute and invading the mausoleum. He has been asked to return to the capital to defend himself. In a few days, he will probably come back to the Supreme Court, He Zhongwei said warmly. It looks like even you, a wealthy and idle person in Jingdou, cannot truly be idle. Fan Xian's eyelids drooped slightly. Casually, he said, you are the emperor's dog, so you have to run around everywhere. I don't. Many years ago, Fan Xian had already slapped He Zhongwei in the face. Now, outside the yamen, he had coldly called He Zhongwei a dog on the street. It was like slapping him in the face again. After all, He Zhongwei was no longer the little imperial censor of the past. As the first-ranked official in court, he had his own face to consider. Furthermore, there were so many people watching. His slightly dark face gradually changed. In a cold voice, he said, as an official, I am the emperor's dog. In my eyes, you are also the emperor's dog. Are you not? Scholar, he thought that these words were appropriate. Not only did he preserve his dignity, but he also blocked these words and made it difficult for Fan Xian to respond. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian smiled when he heard these words. If I am a dog, then what is the emperor? Fan Xian said with a cold smile as he looked at him mockingly. He then turned and climbed into the carriage. He Zhongwei's expression froze. He knew he had said the wrong thing. It was just like how he didn't understand how Fan Xian could influence the Supreme Court. No matter how he had been demoted, he was still the emperor's flesh and blood. On this point alone, the people of the world could not compare. A powerful sadness rose in He Zhongwei's heart. He felt that life was always so unfair. In Jingdou, Fan Xian could not be idle. When he met the emperor's combination of punches with great difficulty, he could only focus on blocking. He had no ability or method to counterattack. On the true battlefield between him and the emperor, a soul-stirring drama was playing out. These dramas had no audience and were not recorded in the annals of history, but they were truly playing out. Only in these places could Fan Xian have enough power to carry out the most decisive counterattack against the chess pieces the emperor had laid out. In Dingzhou and Xiliang Road, no one knew what kind of entanglement Li Hongqing and Gong Dian, who had come to take over his position, were having. On the road from the Qing kingdom to Dongyi, the armies of the two sides were facing off. No one was willing to give way. The 3,000 soldiers of the Yanjing camp for winter training were forcefully blocked at the border, not daring to take a step in. This situation had been at a stalemate for 3 days. The emperor has an edict for us to enter Dongyi to assist the great prince in quelling the rebellion. In the end, the great prince has blocked it with a military order, saying that his 10,000 elite soldiers are enough. The commander of the Yanjing camp, Wang Jikuan, looked at his trusted aides in the tent and smiled coldly. Since those 10,000 elite soldiers are quelling the rebellion in the Liang kingdom, who can stop our soldiers from entering Dongyi? When he said this, Wang Jikuan's anger finally exploded. This was originally a test the court had sent toward Dongyi. Everything had been going according to plan. If the great prince had not sent troops to stop them, these 3,000 elite soldiers would have been the vanguard. The Yanjing camp had prepared 20,000 people to advance along the road. Who knew that these 3,000 elite soldiers would be blocked at the border and not be able to take a step in? He pointed at the generals below and scolded, 1,000. Are 1,000 people enough to scare you out of your wits? They are also soldiers of the Qing kingdom. Do they actually dare to attack the army sent by the court? Those are the Black Knights, a general said in a trembling voice. Chen Pingping is dead, and Sir Fan Jr. is under house arrest in Jingdou. Who knows if these Black Knights, who kill without batting an eye, will actually pull out their swords. The corners of Wang Jikuan's eyes twitched slightly, but he didn't curse angrily. As for this secret military operation, he had nominally accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs winter training. In reality, he had accepted the emperor's secret edict from the palace. Just as he said earlier, this was a test. This was the emperor sitting on the throne testing his eldest son far away in Dongyi. The news of the Jingdou incident had long reached Yanjing. Only now did Wang Jikuan know that the duke had led the Black Knight straight into Jingdou to save old Director Qin. The commander of Yanjing didn't know why Director Qin had suddenly been purged by the emperor. Although he sighed slightly in his heart, as a soldier of the Qing kingdom, he had to obey the emperor's edict. Not long after the Jingdou incident, the great prince suddenly sent an urgent military report saying that volunteer armies were rising and falling within Dongyi. The chaos of war was frequent, and it was impossible for him to escape and return to the capital in a short time. This blocked any way for Jingdou to summon him back. Wang Jikuan knew that the great prince didn't want to return to the capital. As the saying goes, when a general is outside, the ruler's orders cannot be obeyed. It was clear that the great prince, who had successfully controlled 10,000 elite soldiers, had already left the emperor's heart because of the Jingdou incident. Once the great prince's attitude was revealed, the emperor was not angry. Instead, he sent an edict to Dongyi, saying that he would send the Yanjing military into Dongyi to help the great prince quell the rebellion. Just as Wang Jikuan expected, the great prince forcefully refused the Yanjing camp's request to send out troops. Furthermore, the group used to stop the Yanjing army these 2 days was indeed not the great prince's people. The court couldn't even find an excuse. The Black Knights. Wang Jikuan furrowed his brow slightly. Thinking of this group of riders, which were not many but had exceptional battle power, he naturally thought of that idler in Jingdou. It's the last 2 days of 2008. I had wanted to write a separate chapter to canvass for votes and review, but I changed my mind and decided to leave it for when Qingyu was finished. A friend has said that the flavor of Qingyu has changed recently and is no longer sunny. I would like to explain this a little. Qingyu has actually not been sunny for a long time. With such a dead person, there is no sunlight. Ever since I started writing Qingyu, I have always had an opinion that Fan Xian is not like a transmigrator. How should I explain this? I will leave this question for the last time as it takes up too many words. Of course, if there are friends who have noticed this, presumably you will know that my attitude toward transmigrators has long been made clear. However, I have always been curious. What should a transmigrator be like? In reality, human nature really has not evolved. Modern people, ancient people, and other people, as long as they are people, they are all equally ugly and beautiful. Ah, I almost forgot again. I seriously recommend to everyone Zhang Yu, the Fat Tabby Cat's new work, Song of the Heavenly Sword. The book number is 1121194. It is said that this author is a very gay and serious author. His writing speed is slow, but the quality is very good. From the day he wrote to the day he was reincarnated, presumably many friends like him. I am the same. This book is a wuxia novel. Those who write wuxia novels in this marketplace, without question, have invested far more in the battle of the spirit than in the battle of business. This kind of attitude has already ensured the quality of this book. I deeply believe this. Chapter 722. We have to go. Wang Zhikuan did not say these words. He only glanced coldly at the generals in the tent and slapped the table. In a meaningful and heartfelt tone, he said, I don't care who these black knights belong to. I only know that the Bureau of Military Affairs Winter Training Order says very clearly that no one can stop the 3,000 riders of the Yanjing camp entering Dongyi. The 3,000 Yanjing soldiers were just a test. They were the vanguard. It was the attitude the court was showing as it pressed toward the great prince step by step. Wang Zhikuan's eyes narrowed slightly as a cold light gradually rose in them. He squeezed his voice into an icy line. No matter what, the 10,000 soldiers the great prince leads are, in the end, people of the Qin kingdom. The great prince cannot take the risk of a mutiny and bring those soldiers to stop them. Thus, the problem at hand is the 1,000 black knights placed around Nyoto Mountain. The day after tomorrow, we will send the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order to them. If they are still not willing to give way, then it can only prove that they are no longer part of the Qin kingdom's army. But the emperor's attitude toward Sir Fan Jr. is still unclear, a general said worriedly. If the Yanjing camp actually fought with the Black Knights, it would be the same as officially shedding all pretense of cordiality with Fan Xian's faction. The atmosphere in Jingdo was very delicate. The generals in Yanjing did not know exactly how the person in the palace was planning to deal with Fan Xian. If they just wanted to give Fan Xian the cold shoulder, then the Yanjing camp's actions were too dark and heavy. In the future, it would be difficult to salvage the situation. The tent was deep in Yanjing. It was actually a very large room. However, it had a name with a strong military flavor. The generals in the room were all Wang Zhikuan's trusted subordinates, so there were many things they could say that were not taboo. Some things could be said openly. The worry the general spoke of earlier was actually the worry in Wang Zhikuan's heart. The emperor had indeed removed all of Fan Xian's official positions, but he had never truly questioned him. Who knew how the situation would develop in the future? Outside Yanjing, the 1,000 black riders at the foot of Nyoto Mountain were indeed a powerful force. However, Wang Zhikuan had led troops for 20 years. The Yanjing camp controlled 100,000 elite soldiers. Just based on numbers and equipment, they were the best of the Qin kingdom's 5 roads border soldiers. It was impossible that they could not break through the 1,000 black riders' blockade. The problem at hand was that it was impossible for Yanjing to throw in all its troops. Once the flames of war ignited, Dongyi would only belong in name. The hearts of the people would not be settled. It would probably lead to the Qin kingdom's first true civil war. Wang Zhikuan did not dare to bear this kind of historical responsibility. His position in the military had already climbed to the top. Regardless of what other contributions he made on the battlefield, at most, he would return to Jingdo like Commander Yi and become the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs. There would be some progress in his reputation, but in reality, there were no benefits. For this governor of Yanjing, there was very little room left in life for him to struggle. Thus, he had to think about the descendants of his family and the future. Although the emperor still looked down on the world, he was, in the end, old. There would come a day when he would pass away. If Fan Xian could survive this storm. No, even if Fan Xian couldn't, once the third prince sat on the throne, given his relationship with Fan Xian, would he tolerate him? Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed tightly. After all, he was a military commander. He was skilled in strategy on the battlefield, but it was difficult for him to notice the movements in the details. The matter of the Jingdo concubines had not allowed him to understand the emperor's plans. His brows furrowed tightly and then relaxed. Finally, he made up his mind. In a cold voice, he said, "We'll move the day after tomorrow. If anyone dares to stop us, seize their weapons." All of the Yanjing generals had their own thoughts and left the camp with heavy hearts. They were not sure if the military operation the day after tomorrow would actually cause a conflict with the Black Knights. They also did not know if the great prince in Dongyi would actually lead the 10,000 elite soldiers back to the east and directly oppose the Qing kingdom's border soldiers. To sum it up, these loyal Qing generals were worried whether the Qing kingdom's first civil war would erupt in the area under their jurisdiction. Governor Wang seemed to have made up his mind. That night, he went to the Mei Manor and found the leader of the civil officials in Yanjing, Mei Zhili. Mei Zhili was Duke Lu's student. Although he did not have a deep relationship with Fan Xian, he was familiar with Fan Xian. After hearing Commander Wang's sincere request for advice, Sir Mei lightly asked Wang Jikuan a question. Is still in Jingdo, right? Mei Zhili had left his position as the Jingdo magistrate in the 4th year of the Qin calendar and had come to Yanjing. He cooperated harmoniously with Governor Wang's military and political affairs and rarely meddled. Governor Wang deeply understood Sir Mei's foresight and strategy. Just by being able to leave the position of Jingdo magistrate unscathed, one could tell how capable he was in officialdom. The two of them had a good personal relationship, so Sir Mei addressed the young lady of the Wang family as naturally as he would a junior and only called her Hearing the words, Governor Wang's expression did not change. His heart, which had been tempered by the ice and snow of the battlefield, trembled involuntarily. He knew what Mei Zhili wanted to make clear. Wang Ji had entered Prince Heqing's manor in June and become the great prince's secondary fei. Before this young lady was married, she had been exhorted to her face by Fan Xian and lectured for a number of months. Other than Jingdo and Yanjing, most people in the world knew that other than Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Fan Xian had 3 other students of noble status. The first was the third prince, the second was the young lady of the Yi family, Yiling, and the third was the young lady of the Yanjing Governor Wang's manor. In the Qin kingdom, filial piety was the most important word, followed by the word of one's teacher. Given the relationship between the Yanjing manor and Fan Xian, the 1,000 black knights blocking the foot of Nyoto mountain appeared complicated. Wang Jikuan glanced at Mei Zhili. After a moment of silence, he said, "There is an edict from the palace and an order from the Bureau of Military Affairs. Even if it will incite some discussion in the future, this matter has to be done." "Governor, you misunderstand." Mei Zhili's eyes were focused on his nose and his nose was focused on his heart. He had already escaped the political whirlpool of Jingdo for a number of years. Originally, he had no intention of participating in this major matter. However, he was born in the manor of Duke and had too deep a connection with Yi Guipin and the third prince in the palace. Although he was currently in Yanjing, if he wanted to escape in the future, it would probably be very difficult. Thus, tonight, he had spoken these words clearly in front of Wang Jikuan. The teacher-student relationship between Sir Fan Jr. and Ji is certainly worrisome. Most importantly, Mei Zhili sighed and looked at Wang Jikuan. You want to send troops to Dongyi, but anyone with eyes can see that the great prince is no longer listening to Jingdo's edict. Ji is a secondary fey of the manor. Have you thought about this problem? If the great prince truly takes over Dongyi and makes himself king, even if you gather 100,000 soldiers in Yanjing and take down Dongyi, what will Ji do in the manor? Wang Jikuan had guarded the Qin kingdom's borders for many years and had suffered hardships. At the age of 40, he had a daughter. He loved her like a treasure and couldn't help being arrogant and willful. This created Wang Tong's bad habits. Fortunately, Fan Xian had forcefully suppressed her bad temper. Every time he thought of this, Wang Jikuan felt a bit of gratitude towards Sir Fan Jr. However, after being pointed out by Mei Zhili, he said in a daze, perhaps Sir Fan Jr. had long predicted the present situation. Is that why, contrary to everyone's expectations, he used his status as an official of Taichung Temple to facilitate the great prince's marriage to Ji? Thinking of this, Wang Jikuan's heart chilled. He had not thought that the Duke would have such deep and far-sighted plans. It truly made one's heart tremble. Wang Jikuan's position was truly awkward. Although the Yanjing camp was powerful, Dongyi, where its blade was pointed, was already within the range of the great prince and Fan Xian's power. Yet, these two young nobles had an inextricable connection to Wang Jikuan. One was his son-in-law, and the other was his daughter's teacher. Mei Zhili thought for a moment and then said, as for what Sir Fan Jr. was thinking at the beginning, there is no point in you and me guessing now. However, there is something I must remind you. If I can think of the problem here, then the person in the palace can also think of it. Yet, the palace still hasn't done anything to Yanjing. He raised his head and glanced at Wang Jikuan lightly. If Sir Fan Jr. had truly predicted the present situation, then it can only be said that he had great foresight. Governor, you hold the fort in Yanjing, yet you are targeting Dongyi. If the emperor suspects that you are not diligent enough, then no matter who comes, it will probably be difficult to solidify the Yanjing military's morale. Thus, Dongyi's safety will be a bit more guaranteed. My loyalty to the emperor can be seen by the sun and moon. If Fan Xian wants to use this, it won't work. There was no anger in Wang Jikuan's words. Mei Zhili nodded and said, it is clear that Sir Fan Jr.'s arrangements have not been effective. Jingdo has not done anything to Yanjing. In the end, the emperor is a wise ruler and trusts you greatly. Even the military order from the Bureau of Military Affairs and the secret edict from the palace are actually a test the emperor has given you. Wang Jikuan was stern. He raised his fist in a salute and said, I have learned my lesson. Mei Zhili's expression remained serious. Slowly, he said, but, Governor, are you really not going to consider Tong'er anymore? Consider the discussion of the world. If you can truly subdue Dongyi in one battle, you will be a meritorious official of the Qin kingdom. Once civil war breaks out and the flames of war continue, the pressure from all sides will be piled onto your shoulders. But, what can I do? If I truly suppress my troops and do not move, I will be letting down the emperor's trust. Wang Jikuan's brows rose. The conflict in Jingdo will, in the end, land on the battlefield. As the emperor's official, there are many things I have to do. I have to do it. If I can't, then I won't do it. Mei Zhili looked at him calmly. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, to say something disrespectful, this is, after all, a family matter of the emperor. As officials, you and I must be loyal to the emperor. If the Qin kingdom truly breaks out into civil war, how will you and I explain it to the world? the change in Jingdo should land on the battlefield. However, it is clear that Sir Fan Jr. and the Emperor do not wish for this turmoil to spread too far and wide. Otherwise, the Emperor would not continue to let Sir Fan Jr. live, and Sir Fan Jr. would not stay in Jingdo as a wealthy and idle person. Those two are both guarding that bottom line. Governor, when you send out your troops in 2 days, please remember this bottom line. You can threaten or invade, but if you really want blood to flow like rivers, I think it is not wise. I'm afraid that is not the result the Emperor wants. But the other party is the Black Knights. Those wolf cubs of the Overwatch Council do not know what it means to retreat, Wang Jikuan said with his eyes closed. This is too difficult to grasp. You have to send out troops, but you can't actually fight. You can't ruin the Emperor's grand plan, but you also have to prevent the situation from becoming too serious. Speaking of this, Governor Wang let out a deep sigh. He had lived his entire life in the light of knives and shadows, but he had never encountered such a complicated situation. If they wanted to fight, then fight. That was the simplest. Even if the other party was Fan Xian or the Great Prince, if they truly threw the east of the kingdom into chaos, the Emperor would not be happy. Since the Emperor has a secret edict, we have to fight. At the very least, we have to truly confront each other and suppress the Black Knight's momentum. Mei Zhili's eyelids drooped slightly. The palace's edict must be carried out. Pressing down like a storm on a mountain, how many days can the Black Knights resist? Although they are a group of cold-blooded riders who kill people like flies, the Great Prince is not, and neither is Sir Fan Jr. This kind of situation will not last for many days. In the end, they will have to shed all pretense of cordiality. Wang Jikuan looked at him and reminded, the Emperor's edict is here. I don't want the Emperor to mistakenly think that I am not doing my job well. No, there will certainly be an opportunity for the situation between Yanjing and Dongyi to stabilize. Mei Zhili looked at him and suddenly smiled slightly. Sir Fan Jr. has spent so much effort on Shang, and your relationship with the Great Prince in order to seek a balance between the two sides. As for the Emperor's edict, I think he will certainly have a way to end this matter. Although it is difficult to disobey an edict, I do not want to meet the men of the Qin kingdom on the battlefield. Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed deeply. A moment later, he slowly said, however, I cannot see any way in the current situation that I cannot disobey an edict and still withdraw troops from Nyoto Mountain. That will depend on Sir Fan Jr.'s methods. Mei Zhili calmly extended a finger. If he wants to continue, he needs a variable. We don't know what this variable is, but Sir Fan Jr. will certainly know. Wang Jikuan sighed and said, I don't believe he can do this. If he can actually find this variable within 5 days, I'm afraid I will have to be like Shang, and admire him endlessly. 2 days later, there was a somber atmosphere both inside and outside Yanjing. The border soldiers that had gathered from various military camps gathered in front of the city and set out toward the east. After traveling for half a day, they had met up with the 3,000 Yanjing soldiers they had sent earlier and arrived at the foot of Nyoto Mountain. A government road passed by the foot of Nyoto Mountain, passing through the golden and bright red edge of the late autumn forest and extending toward the shore of the East Sea. Following this road, the army could reach Dongyi. The black mass of soldiers gathered there. Banners fluttered in the wind. The riders wore light armor and had a murderous aura. There were more than 10,000 people in this army. Their aura looked very frightening. However, such a menacing Qing border soldier was held back at the foot of Nyoto Mountain and could not advance a single step. At the entrance of the government road at the foot of the mountain, there were 3 rows of black-armored riders waiting solemnly. There were only 3 rows, a total of 100 or so riders. However, they gave off a frightening coldness as they blocked the center of the road. On both sides of the gentle slope halfway up the mountain, there were two even thicker black inclines. They were also the Black Knights. In order to show his loyalty to the emperor, Yanjing governor Wang Zhikuan had put in a lot of capital for this test. He had sent 10,000 border soldiers. Of course, the governor would not personally lead the troops. The one leading them was one of his trusted generals who had already received a secret order. This general looked at the Black Knights on the road in the distance and felt a chill in his heart. The Qing military had long been famous and envious of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They had the best equipment, the best warhorses, and the light armor all over their bodies were personally made by the 3 workshops of the palace treasury. Their battle power was completely piled up with gold. There had always been a legend within the military that if the Black Knights did not exceed 1,000, they could not be defeated if they exceeded 1,000. This was, of course, because the generals of the Qing military deeply knew the power of the Black Knights during their cooperation over the decades. It was also because the Qing law and edict strictly limited the number of Black Knights to below 1,000. Of course, there were military generals who were not convinced. The name of the elites of the Qing military shook the world. Regardless of whether it was the Dingzhou cavalry or the Long Arrow camp of the northern camp, they were all illustrious figures. How could they allow a subordinate cavalry of the Overwatch Council to steal all of the limelight? During the Jingdo Rebellion 3 years ago, Fan Xian had led 500 Black Knights into Jingdo and engaged in a bloody battle under Jingyang Gate. The Black Knights were like death gods from the underworld. In front of countless pairs of eyes, they had forcefully torn apart the rebel army cavalry. Those were the elites of the old Qin family. Even Qin Heng had been stabbed to death by the Black Knight spears. This iron-like reality made the Qing military truly understand the power of the Black Knights. No one dared to underestimate them again. They even felt an indescribable fear in their hearts. The Yanjing general narrowed his eyes and looked at the lone rider in front of the Black Knights. From the other party's silver mask, he clearly knew the other party's identity. It was the commander of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, the silver-masked Jing Gu. The Yanjing general's heart chilled slightly. He knew that the commander of the Black Knights was the fierce general who had stabbed Qin Heng with one spear. After thinking for a moment, the Yanjing general led a few soldiers and squeezed their horses' bellies. With a clatter, they moved closer to the Black Knights' defensive line. Commander Jing. The Yanjing general ordered his subordinate to hand over the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. In a heavy voice, he said, "Please make way." Jing Gu silently accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. After glancing at it, he said, "We are only under the jurisdiction of the Overwatch Council. Until now, we have not received any council orders, so forgive me for not being able to comply." The Great Prince led 10,000 elite soldiers and was actually stationed in the Song Kingdom not far from Nyoto Mountain. However, in order to deal with the court's inquiries, he could not personally lead troops to stop them. He could only give this task to the Black Knights. The mask on Jing Ji's face glowed with a cold silver light. Looking at the densely packed Yanjing army in front of him, he said in a heavy voice, "I am under orders to guard Dongyi. Unrelated people are strictly forbidden from entering. If anyone dares to take a step in, kill without mercy." His words were spoken very clearly and calmly, yet it carried an unquestionable certainty. Under orders to guard Dongyi. Under whose orders? Sir Fan Jr.'s. However, Fan Xian was no longer the director of the Overwatch Council. As for only listening to the orders of the Overwatch Council, that was even more of a joke. If Yan Bingyun truly sent an Overwatch Council official to mobilize troops, the Black Knights would probably cleanly execute the person and then burn the council order into a pile of black ash. These words made the Yanjing general's heart slightly cold and angry. In a cold voice, he said, "This is the court's order. Are you going to defy it?" Jing Gu did not reply. After he finished the conversation that needed to be carried out, he reminded, "Don't think about making a detour into Dongyi. I don't want to cross the mountains to seize your weapons." After saying this, he pulled on the reins of his horse and returned to the solemn Black Knights. The metal spear hanging horizontally by his saddle shone with a cold light. The Yenjing general took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. Narrowing his eyes, he observed the Black Knights close at hand. After looking for a moment, he had to admit that the other party's equipment was far superior to his. Looking at the weight of the equipment, he knew that the quality of the individual soldiers and the quality of the warhorses were far above that of the Yenjing generals. Although there were only 1,000 people, it was easier said than done to charge in with as little blood as possible when faced with 1,000 killing gods. The true confrontation between the Yenjing camp and the Black Knights entered the third day. It was also the fifth day Governor Wang had calculated. There were occasional small scuffles between the two sides. The Yenjing side's desire for battle and anger had already surged. Although the Black Knights were few in number, they were still unusually cold and not excited. It was a time of mutual hostility. Governor Wang also felt that he could not endure it any longer. He had to teach the Black Knights a lesson. Because of the Emperor's edict, waiting for 5 days was already giving Fan Xian and the Great Prince enough time to react. If the Yenjing side continued to maintain the situation of confrontation and were unable to enter Dongyi, the Emperor in Jingdo would probably be unusually angry. Just as Wang Jikuan was preparing to sign the military order to forcefully enter the Nyoto Mountain front line and launch an attack on the Black Knights, a general suddenly held a battle report with a serious expression and quickly rushed into the governor's manor. Wang Jikuan narrowed his eyes as he read the contents of the battle report. His heart felt a chill. He had not thought that Fan Xian would actually be able to create a variable in the north of the Qin kingdom. Furthermore, this variable was one that he had never thought of. He knew that his army could be pulled back. He had not disobeyed the Emperor's edict and had not allowed civil war to erupt within his jurisdiction. This should have been a wonderful thing. For some reason, there was not a glimmer of calmness in Wang Jikuan's eyes. They were filled with worry. The military report came from the northern camp in Cangzhou. It clearly said that Shang Shanhu, who had been resting in Shangjing in northern Qi, had suddenly returned to the border. Leading 100,000 soldiers, he headed straight for the southern front. He was already 70 li north of Cangzhou. Today is the last day of 2008. Originally, I had some feelings. Later, I thought about it and decided to leave it for next month when the Qing year ends to chat with everyone. I just wish everyone a happy new year, truly happy. Those who still have monthly votes, please vote. Don't waste it. This is the last month. I want to look a bit more glorious. Tomorrow, I hear that the monthly votes have doubled. I hesitate. Chapter 723. It was late autumn, and the wind began to pick up. The cold air whistled down from the extreme north, sweeping past the wastelands of the North Sea and the endless North Sea Lake to the north of Cangzhou. Cangzhou was at the northern end of the Qin kingdom. It was the closest city to northern Qi. Purely based on geography, it should be southeast of Shangjing. However, because the cold wind followed the North Sea every year and traveled south, this place was even colder than Shangjing. The autumn trees around them had already lost all their leaves, and the fields below the city were busy harvesting their only harvest at the end of summer. Now, the fields had turned into stubble after stubble, and were covered with a layer of frost, looking very pitiful. It had already snowed a few times. Passing the Qin kingdom fields, the hills in the distance were still covered in snow. It looked very quiet. On the snowy plains, one could faintly see many black dots and northern Qi flags fluttering in the snowy wind. A general on the walls of Cangzhou narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. The scouts had long reported back that the northern Qi army heading south covered the sky and covered the earth. It was impossible to tell how many there were. It was probably the entire strength of the northern Qi army in the south. The northern Qi people had come. The Cangzhou guards were not very afraid. Although the enemy was powerful, they still did not feel a glimmer of fear. During these 20 years, the two sides had fought countless battles, and the northern Qi people had never gained any advantage. Even though the northern Qi general, Shang Shanhu, had been moved out of the northern gate by the northern Qi emperor and had come to the south, he had not been able to advance a single step through the Qing army's tight defenses. The only thing that worried the Cangzhou general was the man called Shang Shanhu. Since 20 years ago, after the Qing emperor no longer personally led troops, the only person in the world who could truly be called a god of war was probably this general Shang Shanhu. This was the glory he had obtained through his years of bloody battles with the barbarians in the north. These few years, the northern Qi army's morale and equipment were clearly far inferior to the Qing kingdoms, but they were still able to maintain a balanced situation in the Cangzhou area. It was all because of this person called Shang Shanhu. He used soldiers like a god and was skilled in the art of splitting and thrusting. He did not truly exhaust all of his strength, but he managed to exhaust the Qing kingdom's two border armies here. After years of small conflicts and friction, both sides strictly guarded their borders and did not carry out any truly large military movements. In the eyes of the Qing kingdom, they were only making preparations and stockpiling rations and military equipment, waiting for the emperor's final order to send out troops. The emperor was still tidying up the court. The Qing kingdom's vanguard army was also waiting. They had not expected that before they could attack, northern Qi would come first. Based on previous years' practice, once autumn came, the two sides would stop harassing and probing each other. General Shang Shanhu would be summoned back to Shangjing for his annual vacation. Why had he suddenly returned from Shangjing this year? The ground slowly began to shake. The sound of the shaking was not loud, and the sound was not very shocking. The black lines on the distant snowy hills gradually drew closer in the direction of Cangzhou. As the distance grew closer and closer, in the eyes of the soldiers on Cangzhou, the countless black lines and the dark cloud-like military formation were gradually broken down into sections of military camps and into specific people. Wearing armor and holding knives and spears, the northern Qi soldiers with faces full of solemnity. The soldiers on Cangzhou even felt that they could clearly see the frost on the northern Qi people's eyebrows and their pale hands holding long spears. A tense and oppressive atmosphere quickly spread through Cangzhou. Immediately after, it was accompanied by the low shouts of the officers. Messengers holding banners hurried back and forth between the dozen corner towers on the city walls. The Cangzhou defending general put down the telescope the palace treasury had made in his eyes. His brows were furrowed deeply. He said to himself, "What exactly do these northern Qi people want to do?" The temperature on the top of the city walls was very low. The words he spoke immediately turned into mist and shrouded his face. Just like the densely packed northern Qi army and horses in the distance outside Cangzhou, it hid the truth and made countless people feel confused. The defending general slowly gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the northern Qi people with astonishing power below the snowy hills in the distance. It was as if he wanted to see through their true intentions. Did they really want to move south en masse? The defending general did not believe this because he believed that Shang Shanhu, a famous general of a generation, would not be so foolish. No matter how skillful the northern Qi generals were at using troops, they would not mobilize so many people to directly attack the Qing kingdom in the bitter cold of the end of autumn. This was a suicidal method. Attack the city. The Qing kingdom's soldiers also did not believe it. Although the northern Qi army that had appeared outside Cangzhou had an astonishing power and was estimated to be 40,000 people, they did not have enough siege weapons. What did they have to take down Cangzhou? There were 20,000 elite soldiers inside Cangzhou waiting with their spears at the ready. General, the northern Qi people have already penetrated deep into the country, an officer beside the Cangzhou defending general reminded him. His brows twitched a little. It was clear he was angry at Cangzhou's inaction. They watched as the northern Qi army invaded the country, yet the northern camp did not react at all. The Qing kingdom had not endured such humiliation in many years. The Cangzhou defending general did not have any reaction. He knew that his conservative response these 2 days had already made many proud Qing kingdom generals angry. However, he knew he was facing Shang Shanhu. Particularly, the northern Qi military's sudden movement that came without warning like snowflakes made him very wary. He could not guess what the other party wanted to do. The northern Qi and southern soldiers split into 3 groups. Using great speed, they broke through the border between the 2 countries and invaded the area controlled by the Qing kingdom's northern camp. This was a large movement the northern Qi people had not made in 20 years. Yet, before this, neither the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council or the military's own intelligence network had caught a whiff of it. Northern Qi's 100,000-strong army had forcefully entered the country. It appeared to be a powerful force, but it was impossible for them to directly break through to the south. However, every military operation always had a purpose. So, what was the purpose of Shang Shanhu's shocking action? There were 20,000 soldiers inside Cangzhou while the northern camp's powerful strength was scattered among the 4 camps with Cangzhou as the center. In front of the city, the 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers were aggressive. But they had split up and entered deep into the Qing kingdom's territory. Was the other party not worried that the northern camp would move troops from all over to surround them? It was late autumn, cold, and heavy with dew. Northern Qi's lone army was advancing far away. There would certainly be major problems with logistics. As long as Cangzhou was sealed and Shang Shanhu was drawn into attack, the 4 camps of the northern camp would quietly surround them. Other than rushing to retreat, what other choice did these 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers have? They couldn't get any benefits at all, yet they had to move so many soldiers and use up so much rations and energy. What exactly did Shang Shanhu want to do? The Cangzhou defending general's brows were furrowed tightly. Looking at the northern Qi people who had already begun to set up camp in the distance, he sank into deep thought. He completely ignored the angry expressions of his subordinates. It was already the 5th day. Northern Qi's largest military operation in 20 years was unexpectedly met with the Qing kingdom's most patient response. The Cangzhou defending general sealed the city and did not come out. The various camps of the northern camp only waited solemnly as they watched the northern Qi people step onto their land. However, they did not make any strong reactions. This was not in line with the Qing kingdom's pride and blood. Even the northern Qi soldiers, who were silently crossing the Qing kingdom's border and waiting at all times for a bloody battle with the Qing kingdom's army on the battlefield, felt a glimmer of surprise and strangeness. In a small city about 60 li from the border between the 2 countries, the headquarters of northern Qi's military operation was set up there. In a private house that had been requisitioned in the city, charcoal was burning in a brazier. The red on the inside seeped through the layer of silver ash on the outside, filling the entire room with the warmth of spring. However, the high-ranking northern Qi generals in the room were not warming themselves by the fire. They stood by a table and looked worriedly at the flattened military map of the south on the table. Occasionally, they would glance at the person sitting in the grand armchair. Shang Shanhu sat in the grand armchair with his eyes slightly closed. It was as if he was deep in thought or deep sleep. Suddenly, He slowly opened his eyes and asked, "It's been 5 days since the 3 roads entered the country. Has there been any movement from Tsangzhou?" The voice of Northern Qi's foremost general was not loud, but it was deep and powerful. "Commander, Tsangzhou is still locked in," a general replied respectfully. Following commander's orders, the 3 roads of troops have not gone deep, other than the one in Tsangzhou. Who would have thought that our counterparts in the south would be more patient than in previous years? Shang Shanhu stood up expressionlessly and walked to the side of the long table. Pointing at a certain point on the map, he said, "However, the Qing people are all proud and arrogant. Furthermore, this is a proper battle and cannot use tricks. The Tsangzhou defending general can at most hold out for another 2 days. It is impossible for him to wait for Jingdo's edict to arrive. He must go out to battle. Otherwise, he will not be able to explain himself to the Qing court. What if they remain locked in the city and refuse to come out?" Shang Shanhu's trusted general asked worriedly. "This time, we've used all of our strength. If the other party holds out for another 2 days, the 4 military camps of the northern camp will see through the truth of the other 2 roads and directly surround them. If we don't receive them in time, we'll probably suffer heavy losses." Not only did the generals of the Qing kingdom's northern camp not see through the truth of the northern Qi military's sudden movement, even the northern Qi people themselves didn't know why they were suddenly sending out troops. Furthermore, they were braving the bitter cold and such a large risk to go deep into Qing territory. Although this was indeed very satisfying, as soldiers, they wanted actual results and not to pay thousands or even tens of thousands of lives just to walk in front of the other party's city and flaunt their might. Perhaps only the emperor in the northern Qi royal palace in Shangjing and the silent general Shang Shanhu knew the inside story of sending out troops this time. But, who in this world dared to ask them? Although we've been on the defensive these years, don't think of the Qing army as too terrifying. Shang Shanhu's palm landed steadily on the map. The Qing kingdom's northern camp uses Tsangzhou as the center. 5 days have already passed, and the other 4 roads of the northern camp have not come to reinforce them. It can be said that they have been stopped by our 2 roads of troops. It also means that the northern camp currently lacks a backbone. A disinterested smile rose to Shang Shanhu's face. The Qing kingdom's equipment and military power are far above ours. If Yan Xiaoyi was still alive, 5 days ago, he would have given the order to abandon the other 2 gaps, surround Tsangzhou, and swallow up my 40,000 soldiers. However, in the northern camp, who would give such a risky military order? Yan Xiaoyi died, and Shi Fei came. Although that General Shi is not as good as Governor Yan, he is still a powerful figure. The Qing emperor was worried about him and moved him to the Jingdo garrison. Shang Shanhu smiled coldly and said, "Back then, the northern camp participated in the rebellion. The Qing emperor had many misgivings. How do the generals of the northern camp still have the ferocity and arrogance they once had under Yan Xiaoyi's hands? These years, the Qing kingdom appears to have been accumulating national power in preparation to invade the Qi kingdom. In reality, they have been harming their own national power, particularly in the northern camp. The Qing emperor is a remarkable figure. However, the remarkable figures under his command have died one after another." Shang Shanhu sighed as if he felt it was boring. "Since it is so, if my 100,000 soldiers go in and take a look, who can stop me? Being conservative is their best choice, but also their worst choice. It's also the choice they have no choice but to make. However, that clever Tsangzhou general probably won't be able to suppress the northern camp's desire to counterattack for long. That is why it will be in 2 days." After Shang Shanhu said this, he walked out of the room, leaving behind the generals looking at each other. The wind and snow had risen outside the room. The snowflakes were not big, but they were fragmented and irritating. Shang Shanhu narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the busy soldiers and logistics officials in the city. A complicated emotion rose to his face. He thought of the emperor in Shangjing and the last time the emperor had urgently summoned him to the palace and ordered him to send out troops at all costs to help Dongyi stabilize. The vanguard of the northern camp was to attract the border army in Yanjing to come to their aid and help Dongyi temporarily relieve the pressure. A chill flashed through Shang Shanhu's eyes. He thought to himself, even if that noble in the south was truly going to turn against the Qing emperor, was it really worth it for northern Qi to pay such a large price? Regardless of whether it was worth it or not, northern Qi would still have to pay a price for this military operation. Just as Shang Shanhu had analyzed, on the 6th day of the battle, the Qing military finally made a valiant response. 2 paths of elite soldiers in the northern camp formed a crab pincer and leaped toward Sangzhou. The other 2 camps sent out all of their troops. Braving the light snow falling from the sky, they charged toward the other 2 paths of northern Qi's army that had just entered the country. In just one day, 3 fires were lit. The wastelands in the north of the land immediately became a battlefield of slaughter. Riders charged, bowstrings strummed, arrows flew through the sky, and spears pierced through the wilderness. Fresh blood flowed, flames could be seen everywhere, and corpses lay in the filthy blood. The sounds of killing shot into the dark clouds in the sky. This piece of land, which had been silent for many years, finally became lively because of the northern Qi army's brazen attack. The curtains were pulled back on the battlefield where hundreds of thousands of lives had been entangled. Everyone fought together with great vigor. However, this curtain was quickly pulled back by Shang Shanhu. Without a trace of blood on his body, the Zhangzhou defending general walked out of the city under the protection of a large group of trusted soldiers. He watched coldly from the side as his subordinates cleaned up the battlefield. He looked at the arrows stuck deep into the withered trees and listened to the wretched cries of the wounded. His expression did not change at all. As a soldier, it was natural for him to fight for the emperor. However, there was always a chill in his heart that he could not get rid of. Even the joy of a Pyrrhic victory could not dilute it. After a night of forceful marching, the 2 reinforcements of the Qing army's northern camp finally formed an encirclement with the main garrison outside Sangzhou. Before they had time to rest for a moment, they suddenly realized that the northern Qi army seemed to show signs of leaving. The Qing army was mighty. How could they allow the enemy to wander within their borders and then leave so casually? An attack that was not fully prepared began. Fortunately, the border soldiers of the northern camp had fought for many years. The Qing kingdom's military power was very powerful. Thus, such a hurried attack was able to maintain a powerful force of attack. However, the northern Qi elites that Shang Shanhu had personally trained were not easy to deal with. After a large battle, the northern Qi army still maintained their formation perfectly after throwing down over 1,000 bodies. Using an unimaginable speed, they left the front line of the battlefield and valiantly threw down a few camps to abandon, not giving the Qing border soldiers any chance to give chase. This battle, it should be said that this strange battle had ended. The Qing kingdom had the geographical advantage and the advantage they already had, so they obtained victory. However, this victory did not achieve the results they had predicted. The northern Qi people ran too quickly. Looking at the captured supplies and rations, the Zhangzhou garrison general narrowed his eyes and felt a glimmer of coldness. He finally understood why he had not seen the northern Qi people siege weapons at the beginning. Even if it was a trap, the other party should have at least brought a ladder. It turned out that from the very beginning, the other party was only prepared to fight a battle and then run. They did not bring any heavy supplies that were difficult to carry, and the entire army went into battle with light equipment. No wonder they did not collapse after the last encounter, and ran like rabbits. Why did they run? The highest-ranking general on the Zhangzhou side once again sank into deep thought. He knew he was not a match for Shang Shanhu. If he could truly understand Shang Shanhu's thoughts and have a clear target, he would not be as scared as he was right now after winning a battle. The next day, shocking battle reports came from the other two battlefields. The two groups of northern Qi elites had not gone far into the territory. At the same time that the Qing army outside Zhangzhou carried out a combined attack, the rest of the northern camp's military power also went out at the same time and killed their way toward the enemy camp on the border. However, the two groups of northern Qi elites ran even faster. All of the generals of the northern camp became cautious. They didn't know what the famous northern Qi general was planning. Thus, they forcefully restrained their subordinates and didn't allow the Qing Iron Riders to use the momentum of the counterattack to kill their way into northern Qi's territory. On the third day, a piece of bad news came. The 40,000 northern Qi elite troops that had escaped from the encirclement outside Zhangzhou, on their way back into northern Qi territory, strangely passed through to the east and entered Dongyi's Song Kingdom territory. They occupied a provincial city on the Song border. It was said that the troops in the Song Kingdom's provincial city did not put up any resistance. Dongyi also did not have any reaction. Thus, they allowed the 40,000 elite troops to enter the provincial city. This city appeared unremarkable and almost abandoned. In the past, no power had noticed this place. Now that Shang Shanhu had led his troops into the city, a large red dot appeared on the map. When the Qing military opened their eyes to take a look, they were shocked to find that this city happened to be right in the middle of the northern camp in Yanjing. It was like a fishbone that pierced all of the Qing soldiers and made them feel very uncomfortable. Was this Shang Shanhu's true intention? In the Battle of Zhangzhou, northern Qi had lost and the Qing kingdom had won. It appeared so, but was this strange battle going to end just like that? After another dozen days, the Fourth Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the military's intelligence system simultaneously sent intelligence reports to the various generals in the northern camp. After the northern Qi army of 100,000 pulled back into the country, they did not retreat and rest. Instead, they began to set up camp in the same place. Furthermore, from the depths of northern Qi's vast country, they began to send all kinds of supplies toward the south in an endless stream. A storm was brewing. This was clearly the sign of a decisive battle. Additionally, Shang Shanhu had taken the unremarkable provincial city. The Qing military immediately became cautious. Without waiting for Jingdo's edict to arrive, they had already begun to make preparations to welcome the true battle. The battle might be next spring. In Yanjing, Commander Wang Jikuan was also forced to pull his attention back from Nyoto Mountain and turn it to the 40,000 northern Qi soldiers above his head. He furrowed his brows tightly. He was furious in his heart. He had never thought that the variable Fan Xian had used would be collusion with the northern Qi people. Immediately after, Jingdo's edict arrived and passed into the hands of the high-ranking generals in Yanjing and the northern camp. No one knew what the Qing emperor said in the edict. After the edict, the Qing kingdom's military power in the north began to rest, lie dormant, and calm. Immediately after, the master of Dongyi, Yunjilan, sent a message to the world. He expressed the strongest protest and anger toward the northern Qi people's brazen invasion. He said that Dongyi would stand by the side of the Qing emperor and would deal the most violent and destructive blows to all invaders. The most terrifying 13 disciples of the sword hut in Dongyi suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where they had gone. Receiving the news, the defenses of Shang Shanhu's camp in the provincial city immediately tightened. Just as the chaos in the north of the mainland was gradually rising, the northern Qi royal palace was peaceful. Imperial Consort Li, who was greatly favored by the emperor, looked at the emperor lying lazily on the couch. Biting her lip, she quietly said, "Dongyi has been saved for Fan Xian." The emperor has paid such a high price. I really don't know what he can give to thank you. Thank me. The Northern Qi emperor laughed coldly and gently rubbed his stomach. That shameless person who is full of evil tricks but always considers himself a saint will probably curse me in my manner for rashly starting a war. Chapter 724. Jean Daudu climbed up from the couch. Sea Lily helped him put on a gray-black cloak. Walking to the door of the palace, he looked at the snowflakes drifting down outside. The highest ruler of Northern Qi sank into deep thought. Northern Qi inherited the Wei kingdom and liked black, green, and other solemn colors. This 1,000-year-old palace built against the mountain was like this. The clothing he wore today was basically these two colors. His bare feet were wrapped in warm velvet shoes. He didn't know if they were warm. Snowflakes drifted past his slightly narrowed eyes and landed on the quiet ground. This palace was deep in the royal palace and not far from the Empress Dowager's palace. It was also not far from the little pavilion behind the mountain. It was very quiet. Without the emperor's permission, no random person was allowed to come close. There were very few eunuchs and serving girls serving to the left and right of this palace. They were all old servants that the Empress Dowager had brought up, so there was no need to worry about Northern Qi's greatest secret being leaked. Even in such a safe situation, the Northern Qi emperor still held her hands behind her back and stared calmly into the snow. There was not a glimmer of weakness. Perhaps for her, dressing as a man had long been something that she did not need to put her heart into or hide. Rather, she had long seen herself as a man, an emperor. This kind of aura had long seeped into her flesh and blood and could not be separated. After Chen Pingping's death, there are only 3 people left in this world who have the right to place their pieces. A complicated expression reappeared on her face. The weather was slightly cold, and her cheeks were slightly red. However, there was no flirtatious feeling. On the contrary, there was a sense of killing. I had not thought that Chen Pingping would play such a game in the end, the Northern Qi emperor's brows furrowed. She let out a breath of cold air and said, "Only now do I understand why the imperial advisor cared so much about Chen Pingping's life before he died." He had long seen that if he wanted to force Fan Xian and his cheap father to turn against each other, only Chen Pingping would make the final choice. I don't understand why Chen Pingping would do this. What kind of hatred could make him do this? She laughed coldly. Presumably, it has something to do with that woman from back then. Sea Lily slowly walked to her side and glanced at her worriedly. She handed over the small heater in her hand and quietly asked, "Does Fan Xian's list of 3 people also include him?" She was the granddaughter of the previous king of the Qin kingdom. Presently, she was the only favored imperial consortly in the Northern Qi royal palace. Her relationship with the Northern Qi emperor was closer than many people had guessed. They were partners, companions who had grown up together, and people they confided in. Earlier, the Qi emperor had said that after Chen Pingping's death, there were only 3 people who had the right to place their pieces. And Ping. Fan. The Northern Qi emperor gently stroked the slightly hot stove and sighed. He has a good mother and is hard on himself to have the power he has today. Don't underestimate his power. There are good things hidden in Dongyi. Hi, the Qi gently, the Qi, the Li, the Fan, the emperor, he, the Qi, the Fan, the Fan, dynasty, Fan, Li, and Long, the A, Fan, the Yun, he, Fan, the Fan, the Northern Qi emperor faintly said. Just this alone proves that the power in Fan Xian's hands makes even the Qing emperor afraid. It's so cold. Don't stand at the door to the palace. Sea Lily carefully looked at the emperor's expression. From the corner of her eyes, she imperceptibly brushed across his abdomen wrapped in a large cloak. The emperor was an intelligent and sensitive person. He immediately sensed her gaze. A glimmer of disgust immediately rose to his face. His cheeks tightened slightly. It was as if he was tightly gritting his teeth and suppressing his anger. Seeing the emperor's expression, Sea Lily snorted and couldn't resist laughing out loud. I wonder what Sir Fan Jr. would think if he knew of your Majesty's current situation. That bastard is ruthless and powerful, but in his bones, he is a rotten scholar. The Northern Qi Emperor was merciless as he harshly criticized the man in the south. With a cold smile, he said, how naive, childish, and muddle-headed the things he has done these few months. The situation has already developed to this point, yet he still hopes to resolve the problem within the Qing kingdom. He still wants fewer people to die so that this matter can come to an end. In the end, he has underestimated the Qing emperor. Even if his old emperor is not a great grandmaster, how can his little tricks shake his position? He wants fewer people to die so that he can change the dynasty. This is truly preposterous to the extreme. The Northern Qi Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not listen to Sea Lily's words. Leaving the palace door where the wind and snow had just begun to rise, he coldly said, if I don't help him this time, Dong Yi and the Yenjing camp will face off. Regardless of who wins or loses, I want to see how he will continue to pretend to be a wealthy and idle person in Jingdo. Does your Majesty truly only want to help him defend Dong Yi? Sea Lily's eyes shifted slightly as she asked quietly. The Northern Qi Emperor's body froze slightly. It was as if he had not expected Sea Lily to see through his other plans at a glance. After a moment of silence, he said, I am the master of Northern Qi. How can I harm my Qi army because of a man? Helping him is actually helping myself. If the Qing kingdom does not fall into chaos, the pressure on the Qi kingdom will be too great. Besides, the Qing emperor has always had thoughts of invading the north. Now that General Shang Shanhu is guarding the south, he will first test the waters and then control the center. With preparations, it will always be easier in the future. I'm just a bit worried about Shang Shanhu, Sea Lily replied with lowered brows. These words were not something a concubine in the back palace could say. However, as noble consortly, many times, she was more or less like the Northern Qi Emperor's strategist. The foreign enemy is powerful. Even if Shang Shanhu holds a grudge against me for working together with Fan Xian to kill Xiao En. The Northern Qi Emperor furrowed his brows slightly. As long as the Qing kingdom does not give up on invading the north, General Shang Shanhu will not forget the world because of a personal grudge. I am like this, and so is General Shang Shanhu. However, Sir Fan Jr. is already in a difficult situation in the south. Once the people of the Qing court see that General Shang Shanhu has sent out troops this time and the connection to Dong Yi. A glimmer of worry flashed between Sea Lily's brows. She involuntarily began to worry for Fan Xian. Of the 3 women in Shangjing who had connections to Fan Xian, Haitang Duo was far away on the grasslands. The emperor in the palace was scheming and cold and emotionless. He probably didn't care much about Fan Xian's life or death. However, Sea Lily couldn't help but worry about the man who was sometimes warm and sometimes cold. I have never worried that the Southerners would see the true purpose of the South trip this time. This cannot be hidden for long. At least, those who know the true state of the Qing court and Dong Yi will certainly be able to guess, the Northern Qi Emperor said coldly. Yenjing's Wang Jikuan will certainly be the first to guess. What is there to be afraid of guessing? Even if it gets out, there is no need to be afraid. Colluding with the Qi kingdom is a crime that even Fan Xian cannot bear. Hearing this, Sea Lily couldn't help but sigh faintly. So, your Majesty has never given up on forcing him to come to Shangjing. However, if it really reaches that step, will he be able to come back alive? The wind and snow chilled people and made their faces flush red. The Northern Chi Emperor looked at the wind and snow calmly and slowly said, "If he is alive but refuses to come, for me and for you, what difference is there from him being dead? Duo shouldn't know of this matter." Sea Lily raised her head and looked at her. "Aunt Disciple is on the grasslands, and the people in Shiliang Road have all died. It is not convenient to contact her." The Northern Chi Emperor lowered his head and looked at the tips of his feet. He was silent for a long time. His right hand suddenly rose and trembled slightly. It was as if he wanted to touch his abdomen. However, he didn't do this action for a long time. His fingertips curled up slightly. Finally, a glimmer of a feminine expression appeared. "Your Majesty, the military report has arrived. The officials are waiting in the closed pavilion." Outside the palace, an old eunuch urgently reported in a raspy voice. The south was currently at war with the Qing people. The military situation was tense. No one dared to make a mistake. For the first time, the Northern Qi people discovered that their army had finally bravely launched the first attack. Their mood was much different than before. Hearing these words, the Northern Qi Emperor abruptly raised his head. The glimmer of gentleness in his eyes had long turned into a cold calm. Sea Lily quickly tied a gold and jade belt around the waist of her large, black robe. She walked toward the outside of the palace. Her footsteps were steady, and she displayed the bearing of an emperor. Leaving the depths of the palace, Sir Langtiao and Friar He were already waiting quietly outside. In the 10th year of the Qing calendar, Dongyi submitted to the Qing kingdom in name. The situation of the world was about to undergo an irreversible change. However, a rain in Jingdo at the beginning of autumn pulled the situation back. Regardless of whether or not Fan Xian, who was in the middle of the whirlpool, had such deep and far-sighted plans, at least the present Dongyi was, in reality, under his and the great prince's control. It had to be said that it was only at this moment that Sigurd-Jian's final order truly displayed its greatest effect. Of the 13 disciples of the Sword Hut, other than Yunjilan, who had become the master of Dongyi, the other 12, as well as the aces of the grandson generation, had all gathered under Fan Xian's command. Additionally, there were the 10,000 elite soldiers led by the Qing kingdom's great prince and the 4,000 black knights Chen Pingping had left for Fan Xian. As long as Fan Xian and the great prince worked together smoothly, Dongyi would once again become an independent power. Regardless of how one looked at it, the trust and cooperation between Fan Xian and the great prince would not be broken so easily. This had already been well demonstrated during the Jingdo rebellion 3 years ago. After Sigurd-Jian's death, Dongyi maintained its independence. Presumably, this great grandmaster's spirit would also be pleased after his death. Other than Dongyi's own power, the key to achieving the present situation was the Northern Qi military's sudden autumn attack in the 10th year of the Qing calendar. This attack had caused the Northern Qi court to lose a great deal of power and rations. In the end, Shang Shanhu's miraculous hands had only coincidentally obtained a provincial city in the corner. It looked like the Northern Qi people had lost more than they gained. Immediately after, Northern Qi moved out and made it appear as if they were heading south in full force, forcing the Qing kingdom to prepare with all its might. A great battle seemed to be about to erupt next spring. This gave Dongyi and Fan Xian at least half a year of buffer time. Regardless of how the Northern Qi emperor, disguised as a man, hid her inner thoughts in front of Sea Lily and only put the interests of the Northern Qi court and people at the forefront, she could not convince herself otherwise. Everything she had done was largely because of that man in the Qing kingdom. He had competed with her for a number of years, cooperated with her for a number of years, and fought for a number of years. In the end, he had become her first and only man. When the news of the battle in the north reached Jingdo, it was already the beginning of winter. This year, Jingdo's weather was unusual. The autumn rain was even heavier. It was as if all the moisture in the sky had been pushed down. After winter, there were no clouds in the sky. It was bleak and cold, but there was no snow. Without the Overwatch Council, Baoyue Brothel's intelligence reports were, after all, marginal information. Fan Xian did not know the true inside story of the battle in the north. However, this did not stop him from analyzing it and coming to a conclusion close to the truth. Different from what Zhang Daodu had expected, the eruption of the battle did not make Fan Xian angry. In the end, he was not a true saint. He was just a normal person. He knew that the female emperor in the north was helping him, so it was difficult for him to be angry. He was just a bit gloomy. The reason for the gloominess between his brows was complicated. Perhaps it was because he had discovered that he had no way of influencing the thoughts of the Northern Qi royal family. Even if he had their greatest weakness, she was, in the end, an emperor. She would have her own thoughts. Another reason was the attitude of the palace after this matter. Northern Qi invading, then retreating, not withdrawing, and preparing for war. These 4 consecutive attacks were all to help Dongyi take some of the pressure off. Any major figure with sharp eyes could see this. Thus, some people also understood Fan Xian's role in all of this. Although not many people understood this and it did not affect the discussions among the Qin people, the silence in the royal palace still caught Fan Xian by surprise. The major figures in the Qin kingdom were shocked by Fan Xian's influence and that he was able to have Northern Qi send out troops to help, such as Duke Lu, who rarely came to the manor a few days ago. That night, Lady Lu's father, Duke Lu, who had been silent in court for many years but still had some power, spoke sincerely and earnestly with Fan Xian for an entire night. He was Lady Lu's biological father and could be considered Fan Xian's ancestor. Fan Xian had always been respectful to Duke Lane in the capital. Although this duke rarely left the manor, at critical moments, he always stood on Fan Xian's side. Although Fan Xian was silent in the face of his lecture, he did not refute it. As a soldier of the Qin kingdom, Duke Lu was shocked and fearful of the faint connection between the battle in the north and the Fan Manor. However, the matter could not be made clear, so the old man only came to the manor to warn Fan Xian and remind him. Even someone like Duke Lu, who did not care about worldly affairs, was beginning to fear the role Fan Xian might play. Why was the palace still so calm? Fan Xian did not believe that the emperor would be shocked by the strange changes in the north. He also did not believe that even if his powerful northern Qi aide was exposed in front of the emperor would feel some fear. The emperor needed a battle. How could he be afraid of northern Qi's invasion? However, this kind of quietness and silence was indeed unusual. The cold air gradually condensed. Jingdo's first snow finally floated down. The beginning of winter coincided with the winter solstice. Dumplings began to be cooked in large pots in various private residences in Jingdo. The business of slaughtering sheep in various shops was extremely good. The delicious taste of mutton soup seemed to rise from every corner of the streets. Prince Hiching's manor, which had been silent for a long time, opened its main doors wide. Honored guests had arrived, but it was still unable to be lively. The people who came were always the same. The imperial soldiers responsible for guarding outside Prince Hiching's manor watched the activity in various places with vigilant gazes. The purpose of these imperial soldiers was, to a greater extent, to guard this manor. The matter of the great prince defying the emperor's will and not returning to the capital had not been made public. Only a few officials in court knew that a prince leading an army outside had disobeyed an edict. This matter was extremely disgraceful. However, for the face of the court and the Li royal family, the court temporarily maintained its silence while the Yanjing camp was unable to enter Dongyi. No one was willing to relax their guard on Prince Hiching's manor. Fan Xian held Shunning's small hand and walked into Prince Hiching's manor with a face full of smiles. He walked side by side with Wang Fei toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Once Lin Wan entered the manor, she was pulled away by Yi Ling. No one knew what this pair of close friends were going to talk about. Sir Fan Jr. truly always has astonishing actions. Prince Hiching's face was without might. She was only tranquil. Presently, she was like a hostage and did not leave the manor for many years. Today was the rare winter solstice, yet, she had invited these young people in the most delicate situations in Jingdou. Fan Xian, his wife, Yi Ling, Princess Ro Jia, Prince Hiching's Wang Fei, and secondary Fei Wang Tong. This was already most of the people in the Qing royal family. Other than the third prince deep in the palace, the younger generation of the Li royal family had all gathered in the manor. Unfortunately, these young people's situations were not good. The great princess must be joking, Fan Xian replied evenly. If we are talking about the matter outside Sangzhou, I think you should know better than me that the young emperor in the north is not someone I can move. Wang Fei looked at him with a complicated expression and faintly said, "It is precisely because I know my brother's personality that I don't understand how you were able to persuade him to send troops to help you." "I think there is no need to bring this matter up," Fan Xian replied with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and replied, "At least it is a good thing for the great prince far away in Dongyi. However, Wang Fei, you are alone in Jingdou. If there is anything inconvenient, please tell me." Wang Fei smiled slightly and bowed solemnly. Although the present situation was unpredictable, she knew that she had once made a mistake. She could not make such a mistake again. Her husband and the young man in front of her were already tied together in Dongyi. The Yanjing camp is pointing its sword at Dongyi. I wonder how Wang Tong feels in the manor. Fan Xian saw that Shunning by his side could not walk anymore. He picked her up and asked Wang Fei. The little girl did not understand what the elders were talking about. She opened her large eyes curiously and looked back and forth between Fan Xian's and Wang Fei's faces. Although Tong Er's personality is a bit arrogant, she is, in reality, a naive and unaffected child. She just finds it a bit boring. Sometimes, when I ask her to go to the Yi Manor, she is overjoyed. She had thought of going to the Fan Manor to have a look. As you know, it is not convenient. I understand. Fan Xian smiled slightly and looked at Wang Fei. At the beginning, I had thought that with Wang Fei in the manor, the young lady of the Wang family would not have any problems. This is all because of you. Oh, right, Masuasua still does not have a status. She is getting older. A glimmer of sadness flashed through Wang Fei's brows. The great prince was far away in Dongyi, far away, fighting against the court as an equal. Her life as a hostage in Jingdou was wretched. Yet, there was still a childlike secondary Fei in the manor, as well as a naturally outspoken girl who did not understand the ways of the world. It made it difficult for her. Fan Xian sighed and said, "How can I care about these things now? Although it was I, the official of Taichung Temple, who made this up, you and I both know that in the end, it was only the emperor's will." Having said this, it was pointless to say more. Coincidentally, the two of them had already crossed the wooden bridge over the lake and reached the center of the pavilion. The sides of the pavilion were all glass windows that let in the light but not the wind. There were a few heaters, and the air was like spring, making one feel comfortable. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the four girls talking together in the corner of the pavilion. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. One winter solstice, Fan Xian was summoned into the palace as the princess's son-in-law. Under the Empress Dowager's icy gaze, he ate a meal of mutton soup without much interest. It seemed that it was still that year when the great prince opened the manor to entertain guests. It was in this pavilion that, other than the crown prince, all of the young people of the Li royal family had come. The second prince had also come. Now, the Empress Dowager was dead, the second prince was dead, the crown prince was dead, and those who should have died and those who should not have died were all dead. There was only Fan Xian locked in Jingdo, the great prince separated from Dongyi, the third prince isolated in the palace, and these 5 girls. All of his descendants were secretly standing on the opposite side of him. Did he really think that he had it easy? Fan Xian couldn't help but think of the emperor in the palace. He stood in a daze at the entrance to the pavilion and was silent for a moment. The hot pot was sent in. Everyone ate the meal in silence, probably thinking of something in their hearts. Fan Xian sat by Rojia's side. Like a warm and amiable older brother, he asked about her well-being and helped her boil the mutton in her bowl. Of the girls in the pavilion, Rojia was probably the weakest and most pitiful. Although there were rumors in the palace that Prince Jing would return to his manor in a few days, thinking of a girl who had endured alone in Prince Jing's manor for months, Fan Xian couldn't help but feel pity for her. Without the servants in the pavilion, everyone spoke more casually. Even Wang Tonghe, who was cautious and unfamiliar with interest in her eyes, did not feel left out. Fan Xian rose to go to the corner of the pavilion to pick up some charcoal. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yiling'er follow him. "I know you care for Wang Tonghe," Fan Xian said quietly as he stood and gazed at her. What would Wang Chang'er's future end be? Would she become a young widow like Yiling'er? No one knew. Yiling'er sighed. She was no longer the charming girl who rode through the streets of Jingdo. "Teacher, are you just going to keep messing around with the emperor like this?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then said, "You're killing me with your questions. However, I'm afraid the emperor doesn't even have me in his eyes. In a few days, perhaps there will be news from the west. Help me ask around and see if there are any movements in the Bureau of Military Affairs. Father will not let me interfere in matters of politics. I'm not Sun Pin-er." Yiling'er glared at him. Shortly after, her expression darkened slightly. "I don't know what you're doing. I just want to give you a piece of advice. P.S. Let's just say a few words. I'm still sick, dizzy, and uncomfortable. However, after finding out that I was third in last year's monthly votes ranking, I naturally became happy. I have to thank everyone, because this is the monthly votes that everyone cast. Thank you so much. Also, I must thank third young Master Tang. A long time ago, third young Master Tang reminded me about the annual rankings. That's why I've been working hard to get votes since July, and thanks to everyone's love and help, I've managed to get into the top 3. Top 3, right? If I'm wrong, then I've really dropped a lot. I heard that third place is the Australian and Singapore duo. I want to ask thee about this and see if I can get a discount. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.